In this world, there were 4 humanoid races. The beastkins carry the traits of many beasts, and it was said that their strength could split the earth. The celestials bear wings and the power to heal. The demons wield mana and command many kinds of magic. And lastly, humans were the weakest among the 4, yet the wisest of them all. And Eremia was the 3rd princess of the human realm, the kingdom of Telesia. With silver hair and crystal-bright eyes, she was hailed as the Jewel of Telesia. She traveled to the land ruled by the Beastkin, the kingdom of Cardias, to become its queen. Telesia and Cardias, for the prosperity of both nations, were going to marry. The story begins with Princess Eremia being greeted by 4 envoys. The maids were shocked that they sent only 4 envoys to welcome their princess. Eremia also found it strange, but thought there might be a reason behind it. More importantly, she couldn't let anyone grow anxious, so she stayed calm and told everyone to calm down. She thanked everyone for all they had done for her. The maids were upset that she was leaving. One of them cried her eyes out while saying that serving her had been the pride of her life. They wished that she would find happiness. Kurt Weil Greenberg, captain of the King's Royal Guard, greeted Eremia and said he was honored to serve her. She introduced herself and said she was looking forward to his guidance. On their way, Eremia couldn't help but ask the reason behind this very small number of escorts for a queen. Kurt said it was true that she was going to be the queen. However, since she wasn't his mate, there was no need for a grand procession. Eremia didn't expect this to be the reason. A mate was a fated partner that the beastkin sought for life. In human terms, it was like the red string of fate. From birth, their instincts longed for it carelessly. Yet, in a world of billions, to meet one's mate was rare indeed, and most beastkin live and die without ever finding theirs. Eremia told Kurt that Telesia was not to become a vassal of Cardias, and in this marriage their 2 royal houses stand as equals and he must watch his mouth. After what Kurt said to her, she started to wonder if the king had already found his mate. When they arrived, Eremia also noticed that there were so few guards even at the gates. The Chancellor of Cardias, Fontana Gauguin, introduced himself and greeted Eremia. She was surprised how young he was, but didn't show it to him. She told her name and said she was honored. Fontana then told her to return to the carriage and he would bring her to her chambers. Before that, Eremia wanted to greet the king, but he said the king was occupied with state affairs. Eremia didn't want to press further yet, but still she was surprised that he didn't greet his queen-to-be. Fontaine brought her to her chamber. She then called his name and tried not to be swayed by his bewitching smile. She asked if they passed the royal palace and the palace behind it. Fontaine confirmed her. She then asked what this place was, and he said it was once a detached palace. Eremia was furious because they were housing her, the queen-to-be, in a detached palace. She asked if the harem would be closed to her until the wedding. Fontaine replied that those were indeed her chambers because the harem was occupied by the king's mate. It was just as she thought. The king had found a mate, and she was using the chambers meant for the queen with the king's approval. She asked why the king didn't wed his mate. Fontaine explained that it was because she was once a commoner and she had since been adopted into a ducal house, but she still faced resistance from the nobility. Beyond that, there was the matter of the empire. Eremia's kingdom, Telesia, desired Cardias's military power to keep the empire in check, and Cardias sought Telesia's political influence. She asked which ducal house adopted the king's mate, and he said it was the Duke of Bradley Gentile. The current king of Cardias was nothing but a puppet of that regent duke. Eremia's sister had seen him at soiree, and he was the very picture of incompetence. She said that he was ignorant without influence or respect. She asked Eremia if she enjoyed playing with dolls. Surya, Eremia's sister, told her that she wanted that nation's power, as a shield against the empire, but a useless king was of no worth, so she wanted her to take Cardias for herself as a doll. Surya was the beautiful yet terrifying queen of Telesia. She said that that was her gift for her betrothal. Eremia prepared for marrying the king of Cardias for politics as a daughter of the royal house, so she wasn't surprised, but she didn't expect her to seize his kingdom. Surya said it was a terribly dangerous game with dolls, but she believed she was the one who could succeed. However, if she fails, her life would end. Hoping that her sister would acknowledge her, she accepted this mission with gratitude. Eremia just hoped that King Chaldeus, the man who would become her husband, would be a kind person. When she was in her room, 3 personal maids came and introduced themselves. They were Eureka, Helma, and Carla. She asked if those 3 were only her maids and found them quite few. Fontaine explained that this was also arranged by the king. Regarding her meal, the king told them to bring it to her room here in this villa because she must be tired from her long journey. Eremia smiled and said he was being quite considerate of her, and being spoiled this much was almost enough to give her heartburn. After that, she dismissed everyone. To take control of this country, she must find those who would raise a banner of rebellion against the king. First, Kurt was out. Judging by his attitude toward her, he was undoubtedly a staunch royalist. He probably even sympathizes with the king who was forced to marry a non-dragon like her. She wasn't sure about Chancellor Fontaine Gauguin because it was hard to imagine a high-ranking official like the Chancellor betraying the royal family. But he did show signs of sympathy to her, even though she wasn't sure if it was an act. And then the three maids. Eureka was the Duchess of Gentile. Helma was also a noble's daughter, and she wasn't sure about Carla. She needed to be cautious since she was unsure. It would be logical to assume Eureka was monitoring her on the Duke's orders, but it also felt a bit too obvious. The next day, Eremia wanted to pay her respects to the king. Eureka seemed unprepared for this request and said she would go and confirm. When she returned, she told her that the king was occupied with official duties and could not see her. Unbelievably, this continued for a whole week. She had never heard of any dragonkin custom about the husband not meeting his wife until the wedding ceremony without a single word of explanation. And when she finally met the king at the wedding ceremony, it was her first time. She noticed that he had a face as beautiful as his portrait, but she knew she didn't come here to find love. So it didn't matter if the king was displeased. And now it was their first night after the wedding. Even if this was a marriage in name only, if he had no intention of even sharing the first night, he should have at least sent a messenger. Tonight she must offer herself to that disagreeable king. The thought of that made her really uncomfortable. But to fulfill her elder sister's command until she had this country in her grasp, it was better if she was thought of as an obedient woman. She convinced herself that she was not scared. She wasn't sad either. She was the third princess of the Telesia kingdom, Suria's sister, and this body was also for her sister. When she opened her eyes, she realized that it was morning and she had spent the night alone. The king didn't come. She started getting ready while laughing with anger. That was the last straw for her because the king was a foolish man who couldn't even grasp how to treat a royal princess. She decided that he was going to sever that red thread and send him, her dear partner, straight to hell along with it. Current king of Chaldeus, as the proud king of the beastkin, excelled in martial arts and was blessed with striking looks. His personality was a bit hot-headed and reckless, but because he fulfilled the beastkin's long-cherished wish of meeting his mate, he earned deep support from the people. Helma saw Queen Eremia reading a book with a serious face and wondered what she was reading. It turned out it was one of those romance novels everyone had gossiped about, and she found that carefree about her. But Eremia was actually reading a report compiled from the royal tailors and jewelers' ledgers. Taxes in Chaldeus had been steadily rising lately. The primary cause appeared to be the mate's extravagant spending. Spending this much money on dresses and jewels was truly unforgivable. As the king's favored consort, she must already receive a generous allowance, but raising taxes just to indulge her was unbelievable. In Telesia, they were told to see everything with their own eyes, so she decided to wear a maid costume and check on that mate. She went to the harem and walked towards the mate's room. Ymir, Chaldeus's mate, was showing her new clothes to the king and asking if they looked good on her. Chaldeus kept complimenting her as she kept buying everything they brought to her. Fontaine reminded the king that he had abandoned his duties, and once again, he was shopping for his mate. He asked why she needed so many dresses and shoes. Ymir stated that it was because there were people who looked down on her just for being born a commoner, and at the very least, if she didn't keep herself looking proper, she claimed she would bring shame to the king. The king was totally blinded and comforted her that she was admirable, and for him, as long as she was with him, that was all he needed. Ymir then mentioned that he married the princess of Telesia the other day, but he explained that it was only because the nobles insisted and he had no choice. Ymir said it was fine, but a woman born a princess must already have countless dresses and jewels, and that must be why everyone called her beautiful. Eremia heard her, and she knew Ymir meant that the queen's beauty was only in her possessions and not in herself. Ymir said she never even got to hold a wedding ceremony. The king felt bad and said the princess of Telesia was beyond compare to the likes of her, and that she was a woman with neither beauty nor grace. Fontaine interrupted and told him that he wouldn't allow him to insult the queen. She came from a distant land to bless their kingdom's prosperity. He insisted that Queen Eremia was truly a beautiful woman and her heart was modest too. Even though she had been cast away to a remote palace, she never complained. Unlike certain people, she didn't beg for expensive jewels, and she simply spends her time reading. Ymir stated that it was because she already had everything from the start, without having to beg like her. She then asked what he thought about her dress and told him to raise the taxes again if it was about the money. Eremia couldn't believe she was suggesting raising taxes so carelessly. Fontaine asked if she even knew where taxes come from and explained that they were paid with the sweat and toil of their people. They didn't exist to fund her wastefulness. The king told Fontaine not to insult his mate. Ymir had a different idea since raising taxes was no good, and said they should take it from Lady Eremia's allowance. She knew she got more than her. Fontaine told her not to be absurd. That would be embarrassing, and on top of that, someone from her station to call the queen by name was disgraceful. The king asked what was wrong if Ymir used the queen's allowance because he thought he should have married Ymir in the first place and done his duties with her by his side. Fontaine told him to stop this nonsense because, as her husband, he was bound by duty to honor and respect their queen. And Fontaine was even willing to be executed or go to prison if the king was displeased by his words. But King knew he was right. Eremia realized that Chaldeus was like a child. Yet he didn't punish Fontaine just now because the country couldn't function without him. Still, to stand unyielding even before the king was really impressive, and Eremia figured that this man would be the key to bringing Chaldeus to heel. While the maids took back the things she couldn't buy, Ymir started crying while the king asked for forgiveness. Eremia thought there might be room for sympathy for her because she couldn't wed the one she loved because of her status. But as someone born as a commoner, she should have understood the people's suffering better. Neither she nor Chaldeus deserved a crown. After collecting enough information, Eremia went to spread what the king had been doing. The writer who will print the brochures found this information very juicy. He had heard rumors before about taxes climbing right after the mate was brought into the harem, but this was downright raw. Dresses and jewels were packed wall to wall in the hall, and the mate was drowning herself in them while the chancellor and the king were quarreling over the misuse of taxes. He wanted to spice this up a little and wrote that the king swaps between the mate and the queen every night. Eremia told him that this was a complete lie, but he said those things sell better. Eremia told him that the queen remained pure. Writing about the king not touching the princess he was gifted was also a tragedy in its own way, but without the spice the illustrations would be dull too. Eremia told him to stick to the truth and left. The pamphlets were plastered on back alley walls, slipped into shopping bags, passed around from hand to hand, and became a common truth. The townsfolk were angry over how the mate was buying dresses and jewels every single day with their taxes, while they couldn't even afford bread each day. And the king hasn't even shown the princess of Telesia that they were given as queen. They started to feel empathy for her and heard how she was locked away in a remote palace, and the king just spent all his time playing with the mate instead. And they were worried that if Telesia found out about this, it could mean war. Fontaine was nervous after all that. She felt bad for him, but this was fulfilling her sister's command. She needed one final push. As a finishing blow, she peeked into the mate's closet and found a whole room already filled with dresses and jewels. No way could come from her official allowance. Ymir had already dipped her hands into embezzlement, and there must be a secret ledger. She went to the Minister of Finance's private chambers as a maid and started listening to them. The Minister of Finance was worried and wanted to handle this himself. They were talking about killing a queen brought from another nation, and how it would mean war. Eremia was also looking for something in the room and found a false bottom inside a drawer. There was a notebook in there, and it said that small amounts were siphoned from each budget, but the total was massive. All of it was spent on tailors and jewelers. There was no doubt this was the proof of the mate's embezzlement. The handwriting belongs to the Minister of Finance, and the whole country was machinery twister to serve the king's mistress. If the master was corrupt, then the more loyal to his retainers, the more they suffer. She sympathized with Fontaine, but there was no way she would show mercy. He was going to have to choose between loyalty to his lord and sincerity to the people. Fontaine was in a dilemma. He too was of the dragon tribe. He understood the instinct to seek out one's mate. Many of the people rejoiced when they heard their king had found his mate. But looking at Chaldeus, he was besotted with his mate, indulging her waste, neglecting both his duties and the queen. He was never jealous about politics to begin with, but now it was worse. His own mother left them when she found her mate, abandoning his father and him all for her destiny. He questioned whether trapping others meant to have a mate and whether these things could be allowed. And if that was what it meant to be a mate, then he surely didn't want to meet his. Fontaine went to the king to inform him that the Minister of Finance had embezzled. They had already confirmed it, and he showed him the ledger. He asked if they should dismiss the current minister. This was the most they could do for now. If the king knew his mate was involved in the embezzlement, he wouldn't have been able to dismiss the minister. So instead, the minister was dismissed, and Ymir did nothing to stop it. In the next scene, Eremia was told to move to the next stage. The heart of Chaldeus was rotten through, and with just her, Eremia, and the spies Telesia sent, toppling this nation would already be possible. But Eremia wanted to offer this country to her sister in the most beautiful way possible. She said she would build an army that swore loyalty to Syria. Fontaine was capable, but precisely because of that, he was a true loyalist. It would still take time before she could draw him to her side. Before that, she needed as many soldiers as possible from within Chaldeus itself. They would become the driving force to remake this country. For a private army, she needed an audience with King Chaldeus first. However, whenever she requested to meet the king, they told her that he was busy with affairs of state. She knew he was meeting with his mate, but was surprised that he was doing this every single day. She couldn't wait any longer because she needed him to come out. She asked if the king had time for the concubine, but not for his queen. Helma was shocked and told her not to call her a concubine and said Lady Ymir was his mate and his one and only partner. Helma just said her name. For someone of lower status to call a superior by name without permission was unthinkable. She had heard beastfolk were possessive. They hate it when others call their mate's name. This meant that Helma wasn't just a piece of Gentile scheme. She was personally close to Ymir, and she might even be close to Kaldiar as well. She would be a fool not to use this against her, so she scolded her. She asked who she thought she was talking back to and said her master was her, the queen of this country. Helma didn't expect her to react like that. Eremia said if she disliked it so much, she would give her another name and call her a mistress. After calling her that word, the king was furious and he started running to Eremia's room. Fontaine tried to stop him because if he wanted to visit the queen, he should send word ahead, because otherwise it was an insult. But he didn't listen to him and told him to shut up. When he slammed open her door, Eremia calmly greeted him. Before the king could do or say something, Fontaine stood between them to protect Eremia. The king told him to move, but he said he couldn't obey. He told him that the one here was now his wife, but the king didn't accept that and said Ymir was his wife. Eremia told Fontaine that it was fine and assumed the kings must have business with her. The king saw her outfit and thought she was begging for dresses or jewels. Eremia said she didn't understand what he meant. He told her not to play dumb and said her dress was ridiculous, and said he hated people like her who demand things indirectly. Eremia stated that this was Telasia's traditional dress, and asked why she, a woman of Telesia, wearing this would be a begging. Shocked, the king told her that she was the queen of this country now, and told her to throw away anything from her homeland. Eremia was about to snap, because the king had been disrespecting her in so many ways, and didn't even apologize. She was sure he was an idiot and said learning each other's culture was necessary for building good relations. He told her to go back to her homeland if she missed it so much, like a child. Eremia kept calm and offered some tea as an apology. He responded that there was no way he would drink tea offered by her. He said that the king of a nation must always live with the fear of assassination and be prepared for it. She said that hadn't occurred to her because in their royal family, to guard against assassination, all heirs drink poison from childhood to build resistance. He was shocked and found this barbaric. Eremia thought Chaldeus was more sheltered compared to her. He lost his parents young, sat on the throne without a proper education, and survived only by being a puppet of the nobles. Even so, a king may not run from his duty. Eremia asked why he was here. Chaldeus said he heard she called Ymir a concubine. She confirmed that she did and explained that Helma scolded her, so she corrected herself to mistress. After that word, Chaldeus took out his sword and tried to kill her, but she dodged him, and he only cut her cheek. He told her not to insult his mate, but Eremia told him that it was the truth. The queen of this country was her, and a mate was a concubine, or at best a mistress. Chaldeus started telling her to shut up, and the way he talked sounded more childish than ever. He said that there was no way he could ever love her. She said that was fine because they married for the sake of their nations, and love wasn't needed here. That's why she said that he was obligated to guarantee her rights and safety. He asked what she was getting at, and she asked him to assign her guards. He said she should have brought them from Telesia if she wanted guards. Fontaine had explained to him many times that when the queen married into their country, she relinquished all property and rights in Telesia, and they requested that she come here. Thus it was their duty and obligation to provide her with maids and guards. The ones at fault against all propriety were them. The king had had enough of everything and told her to choose as many as she wanted and assign them herself. With that, Eremia got her trump card. Queen Erema Klusner of the Kingdom of Cardias could have the right to freely choose and appoint soldiers from within the palace staff as her personal guards. That night, when she went to sleep, men with robes came and checked if she was asleep. They were fine with anything because they had numbers on their side. One of them took out a knife and prepared to kill her. But before he could stab her in the heart, Eremia opened her eyes and kicked the man out of her. She grabbed a sword and slashed one of them. The other two didn't back off and continued to attack her. Eremia killed every single one of them to save her life. Haku came and found her in the middle of them. He apologized for not assisting in the first attack and said Lady Surya ordered him to let her repel it with her own strength. Eremia was shocked and asked if she had passed. Haku said they might not even be worth enough to be considered a test. She started doubting herself and having a panic attack. She said this much was nothing, and Surya would have done it better, and her sister would have done it without hesitation. Haku held her hand and said she was not Lady Surya and they were different people. He said she endured well and it was fine now because there were no enemies here, and even if they came, he would protect her. She broke into tears after his words because that was her first time killing someone. She was so scared, and she killed because of that. Haku stayed by her side until she calmed down and fell asleep. Meanwhile, Helma fell asleep next to the queen's door. When she woke up, she saw the door open and went inside to check. When she saw the incident, she was shocked. After that, everyone heard about the incident. They thought it would be unseemly for a woman to take care of 3 men by herself. The intruders were frightening, but the queen was frightened too. Eremia asked Carla about her opinion on how they say a woman who drives off intruders with a sword was disgraceful. Carla said it was a foolish thing to say. Eremia agreed with her and said they might get along well. Suddenly, Eureka came to her room to inform her about urgent news. She told her not to raise her voice so carelessly in the palace and asked what the news was. She said that the king's mate had invited the queen to a tea party. For someone of a lower rank to invite someone higher to a meal first goes against palace etiquette, and it made her wonder if they didn't know the manners or if they were trying to show they were above her. She said she would accept the invitation and asked when it was. Eureka said it was right now. The tea party had already started, and the king's mate was waiting for her in the harem. Eremia couldn't help but laugh. She said she would get ready right away and told her to bring a dress and accessories. Eremia knew this was a challenge, and she accepted it. While preparing her, Eureka couldn't help but compliment how beautiful her hair was. She said silver hair was the envy of all noble ladies, and they even dusted flour into their hair to make it white. Eremia said she is still always in trouble her, and with so few maids, most of her grooming falls to her. She said she was happy she could care for her. Eremia figured that the more time she spent tending to her, the more convenient it was for her. After getting ready, Eremia entered the harem and introduced herself. She thanked them for inviting her today. Every woman in there greeted her back, and they were amazed by her beauty. Ymir was grinding her teeth because of jealousy. Eremia smiled kindly and said she was glad she had the time, even though it was a sudden invitation. She asked where the host, Lady Ymir, was. Ymir started waving her arms wildly and said she was here. Even the way she was waving didn't have a shred of noble grace. Ymir called her by her name and said they were both wives now. She then told her that she mustn't call her name without permission. The other women giggled silently. This was Ymir's domain, and she had no allies here, but Eremia wasn't going to be cowed, so she said they were not the same. She said she was the queen of this kingdom, and even if the king doted on her, she was but a concubine, and she may call her name of her own will, but she could not do the same to her. Ymir claimed that dividing people by status was wrong, but she was the first one to tell her not to say her name, so she only taught her the proper manners of court. She said that one must not call those higher rank by name without permission, and one must not invite them to a meal before being invited oneself, and when they arrive she must curtsy, lifting her dress. She told her that she would damage even the king's dignity if she couldn't uphold court etiquette. The women in there could feel the pressure in the atmosphere. This was the pride of a true-born royal, and a mere upstart mate could never know. Ymir was furious and told her that all she had was flaunting authority and called her a pitiful woman. She said that she pitied her because she came without even a single retainer or maid, and that's why she begged the king to assign her one. She then said that was what nobles call their sacred duty. Ymir expected an outrageous reaction, but Eremia was calm as ever and said the reason she came without attendance was because that was the custom for marriage in this land, and she should at least study her own country's culture, and in just a tea party alone, she had stained the king's dignity 4 times. And for the king's and her honor, she decided to take her leave and walked away. Ymir told her they weren't done talking yet, but the woman stopped her. When she returned to her room, Haku came and enchanted the entire room so she could speak freely to him. Eremia was furious because even though she came to overthrow this kingdom, she couldn't believe how both Chaldeus and Ymir didn't understand anything about diplomacy. Cardius needed Talesia's politics, and Talesia needed Cardius's strength. This marriage was for mutual gain, and even the farming techniques to grow crops in this barren land were provided by Talesia. Though she gave up wealth and status to wed, she was still of Talesia's royal blood, and if anything were to happen to her, it could mean breaking the alliance, at worst, war. She could not fathom what they were thinking. Haku responded that a fool sometimes devours the wise. He saw Talesia's education was strict and advanced, but not everyone received the fine schooling she did. Fools chase short-sighted desires, lose sight of the bigger picture, and destroy themselves. What was truly terrifying was how their folly dragged countless innocents with them into hell. That's why he asked her to take great care. He said he wanted to get to the point about the companions around Ymir at today's tea party. He also noticed that she haven't arranged guards for herself. She said she wanted to choose them carefully. Haku was a bit worried, but she said she could protect herself. Haku responded that the next assassin would be stronger since they failed before. She said she knew, and they still didn't know who the mastermind was. They should have captured at least one alive for questioning. Haku gave her a charm to repel any physical attack just once. Eremia thanked him and said it was beautiful. Haku explained that he couldn't help her by order of Queen Surya, but now he could move at once. So he wanted her to always remember Haku was at her side. Meanwhile, at the harem, the Minister of Finance was begging Ymir to intercede with the king to withdraw the decision. Ymir asked why she should do such a thing. He found this very cruel because she had no idea how much convenience he had given her shopping until now. Ymir told him that he did that on his own, and seeing a grown man clinging to someone young enough to be his daughter made her sick. She wanted him to disappear and said she hated ugly things. The minister had had enough of her and took out his knife to kill her. Before he could do that, the king came and saved Ymir. The minister tried to explain, but Chaldeus said he didn't need a reason to raise his blade against his mate. He said he was going to sever his head here and now. Fontaine came and stopped him. He said he knew the crime of harming his mate could not be so easily forgiven, but reminded Chaldeus that he once bore this kingdom's finances. He asked him to grant him mercy this one last time. Ymir told Fontaine that he was too soft, and yet that gentleness was also his strength. Fontaine was embarrassed, so he couldn't make eye contact with her and accidentally made eye contact with Eremia, who was in disguise. He said he didn't recall ever seeing her as a maid before and asked Ymir if this person was truly her personal maid. She said she didn't bother remembering every servant's face, especially such a plain one. Haku had altered her hair and eye color with magic, and makeup made her look dull. And yet Fontaine noticed that she resembled a woman he once knew more and more. He asked if she had ever entered the minister's chambers, and she said no. He responded that only the minister's own attendants should have access to that key, let alone smuggle out his hidden ledger. Eremia duplicated the key with Haku's magic. Chaldeus mentioned that he was the one who found the minister's secret ledger, but he said it was placed in his chambers without him knowing. Thanks to that, he was able to expose his corruption, and he was grateful to that someone who helped him. The next day, the Minister of Finance's dismissal was announced, and he left the palace. A few days later, Ymir asked Eremia to prepare a dress for her. She asked the purpose, and Ymir scolded her instead of explaining it. A noblewoman's attire depended on the occasion. For the afternoon, an afternoon dress with sleeves below the elbows was modest for this time and place. But today, Ymir wore one that bears her shoulders, an evening gown for balls. She wondered what her purpose was and why no one spoke about it. Ymir told her that she was going to the city and buy new dresses and jewels. Merchants hardly come to the castle anymore. That was because rumors spread that her spending was draining the treasury. Since the merchants were slow and useless, she decided to go to the city herself, so she told her to hurry and prepare. Eremia went to pick out a dress, but every one of them was dripping with jewels and lace, so extravagant that they weren't suited for strolling the city. Ymir asked how long she was going to keep her waiting and told another maid to pick her something. Eremia couldn't believe she meant to parade into the city where citizens groan under heavy taxes with such a dress. The other maids complimented how beautiful she looked and fed her ego. No one dared admonish Ymir, and if she flaunts such splendor in front of suffering citizens, riots could break out. Everyone was too busy flattering Ymir, and not a single one truly acted for her sake. They only seek favor for their own gain. She recalled how Haku said not everyone received a high-quality education, and that explained a lot. The tutors of Telesia were strict, but thanks to them she survived that assassin's attack, and even here in this palace, without allies, she could keep her pride. Ymir had nothing but her fated mate, and she cannot stand on her own at all. That was the real pity woman there. Eremia went to Fontaine's attendant and gave him something. If Ymir parades into the city in that ridiculous dress, the people's trust in the royal family would crumble. It may serve her advantage, but she still wanted nothing to happen. With 3 maids and 3 guards, they entered the city. The people who saw her were pretty shocked. Since Ymir kept walking without holding up her dress hem, Eremia couldn't stay alert to their surroundings. They started to notice how her dress was covered in jewels, and just one could buy them so many loaves of bread. Ymir found this castle town gloomy and boring and even expected them to scatter flowers in welcome. She had no idea her wasteful spending threatened the people's lives. Suddenly, she noticed someone walking with a hat that looked more expensive than hers. The guards tried to stop her because the back alley had shady shops and it was dangerous. Ymir didn't listen to them and even fired them all just to chase a person who was wearing a hat. When she entered that alley, the Minister of Finance was there with a knife in his hand. Ymir pushed a maid to protect herself, and the maid was badly injured. The minister swung the knife again, but Eremia dodged him and took out the knife she was hiding. The minister was shocked that a maid had a secret weapon. Alicia told them to treat her wound, but they did nothing. The girl was screaming and crying her eyes out because with a wound like this, she could never marry, and her father would tell her never to come home. This reminded her that the maids and attendants of royals were nobles too. She told her to breathe in and out slowly, but the girl didn't calm down at all. She told her to stop crying, and if she screams, the wound would worsen. She told her to clench her teeth and endure it, and she would live. Meanwhile, the guards were about to take care of Scoundrel. Scoundrel was still pissed because of Ymir. He started yelling around saying he was ruined because of her. She said he was dismissed for embezzling the country's money and that she had nothing to do with it. But the minister said he embezzled to pay for the silk dresses and diamond rings she wanted. He told everyone in the town that he was the former Minister of Finance and said Ymir's silks and jewels covering her dress were worth far more than giving everyone white bread for 100 years. He said that no official salary could cover this. and he embezzled state funds again and again to buy it. Ymir tried to object, but he continued saying that this woman pinned all the crimes on him and had him exiled. He accepted that he committed crimes and he was punished, but Ymir didn't. Even now, she struts through the streets in dresses and jewels bought by taking away their bread. He encouraged them not to forgive the vermin stealing their bread. King Chaldeus, who allowed this woman to waste away, was a swarm of locusts on their wealth for the next 10 years. Everyone started seeing truths and rebelled against Ymir now, because some people died because of malnutrition, someone's wife miscarried from lack of nourishment, and they survived on broth with scraps of vegetables floating in it every day. And all of it, all their suffering, was because of King Chaldeus and his mate. Fontaine came and told the citizens to stand down. Since he was the chancellor of the kingdom, they cleared the way. The guard tried to explain what happened, but he said he was aware of this situation. Fontaine was upset about all of this, but the minister said he would accept whatever punishment because he accomplished what he had to do before his life ended. The girl who was injured was still in pain. Fontaine asked Eremia if she was injured, and she said she was fine. She told him to see that she received proper treatment, and he should do what he could so there were no scars left behind. After that day, the maids started talking about the incident, and how they said she shoved her maid to take her place when she was attacked. They were thinking of quitting as her maid because it could be them tomorrow. Their families wanted them back because it was dangerous now that the king and his mate were losing favor with the people. When Eremia was in her room, Fontaine came to see her. She told him to skip today's formalities and said she had dismissed the maids as well. She was going to answer his questions. He said he wouldn't ask her how she changed her hair color and eye color, but he wondered why she was there disguised as her maid. He said she was scouting enemy positions. He asked if she stole the ledger and placed it in her office, and she said she did. He said that it was useful, but it was still dangerous because Duke Gentile was trying to kill her. She said that the wicked would simply be eliminated. Fontaine asked why she helped that maid. Because of her aid, she survived. Eremia asked if he meant that she should have abandoned her. He said yes, because she was being targeted by Duke Gentile to ruin the reputation of the Duke's house and of the mate he supported. It would have been better if the fact stood that she shoved her maid into death as her substitute. Eremia stated that no matter the advantage, there was no justification for sacrificing an innocent life. He said that the maid was grateful. She couldn't recall who in confusion, but she remembered a maid who stopped the bleeding, held her hand, and encouraged her. That's why she decided to live on. Eremia said she was glad even though it wasn't something she did for her. But Fontaine knew she was lying. She said that was all she could answer, and told him to leave. When he left, Eremia couldn't help but tear up because she was so happy that the maid was going to live. And Fontaine decided to reevaluate his opinion of Lady Eremia. The former king of Cardias never found his mate, and to fulfill that emptiness and craving, he kept over a dozen mistresses, created a harem in the rear palace called the Dragon Brides, let them live in gaudy luxury as they wished, and in no time drained half the treasury. Worse, he drowned in life with his mistresses and neglected the queen for years. The previous queen, an illustrious princess welcomed from a neighboring land, could do nothing against the tricks of the women the nobles supplied to curry favor with the king. And some were even former courtesans. Though the rightful queen, she was forced to endure days of abuse from the mistresses and their children. She apologized to Chaldeus for being weak and made Chaldeus suffer humiliation. After unending days of humiliation, she made a decision. To forge a new bond with the king, his favored ladies, and all of their children, she hosts a feast. She said that for a long time she wondered why she could not live in harmony with them all, and she realized that she didn't respect them from the heart. She said she was shallow and when they should have been friends who support the king's heart together, and asked them to forgive her. Born purely royal and untouched by the world's malice, she was far too good. Thus, the king, his mistresses, and all their children, 33 in total, no one ever imagined she would poison them. After killing everyone, she told Chaldeus that his face was covered in scales, and it was bad manners to reveal his beastman nature at a celebration. She tried to kill him before he became a complete dragon. But the real reason she wanted to kill him was because he was the child of that hateful, loathsome, and detestable man. However, she couldn't do it at the very last second because he was her child, the one she bore in pain, and she killed herself. It is said that about 3 hours passed before the 34 corpses and the lone surviving Chaldeus were found in the banquet hall. To convey her sincerity, the queen had sent away the maids and unfamiliar hands prepared the feast herself. She looked truly devoted and touching. No matter how his wet nurse, his aides, or his childhood friend Fontaine called to him, Chaldeus did not utter a single word. About 3 months after falling into aphasia, he finally forced out something like words. He said he must find his mate by any means. True to those words, Chaldeus spared no effort or trouble and searched the entire country for his mate, and on the day just before his coming-of-age ceremony, he finally grasped destiny. At the ceremony, standing on the palace balcony, Chaldeus declared to the people that he had at last met his destined mate and swore that he would not repeat the former king's sins and would love only her. Ymir, being a commoner, was not permitted to attend the coming-of-age ceremony. Because Chaldeus had found his mate, the people hoped that, having found his one and only partner, Chaldeus wouldn't pour money into mistresses like the previous king, and taxes would lighten. Their lives would improve. However, the agendas of the regent, Duke Gentile, and the anti-Gentile faction collided. The Duke of Gentile was supposed to lose his influence once Chaldeus came of age and his regency ended. However, by quickly adopting Ymir as his foster daughter and becoming her guardian, he gained favor with Chaldeus and continued to wield strong authority. The faction of nobles who disliked the Gentiles' long-standing dominance seized upon the former king's crimes and debts as their pretext. The neighboring nation that had sent over the queen brought charges against the Chaldeus royal court for the death of their princess by her own hand. Chaldeus, with a history of plundering many lands with the virtue of its powerful military, was a strong nation, but it had a poor international reputation and was no diplomat. Moreover, the concept of a mate was a custom incomprehensible to non-beastkin races. Some beastkin even use it as a pretext for assault, abduction, or infidelity. Despite their victimhood, having the king, his lovers, and their children murdered, the trial ended in a crushing defeat for Chaldeus, and they were ordered to pay massive reparations. To repay the enormous debt left by the king, they decided to welcome a princess from a great power and receive support. By warmly receiving a queen who was not the mate, they aimed to rebuild trust with the international community. Such were the arguments of the anti-Gentile nobles. But Chaldeus stubbornly refused to wed any consort other than Ymir. So the anti-Gentile faction all but forced Fontaine, Chaldeus's childhood friend, into the chancellor's seat and dumped the problem on him. Young and having a distaste for the custom of mates, Fontaine tried to advise Chaldeus. He told Chaldeus that they could make the lady mate's life truly happy with the king's protection, but the heavy burden of queen was too much for her. He asked him to take the lady maid as a concubine and welcome a foreign princess as a queen. This touched Chaldeus's reverse scale. He asked if he thought he understood the heart of him who carried his father's blood, the blood of the man who kept countless mistresses and drove his mother mad. This blood flows in his body, and the only things that could free him from this blood's curse were the bond called a mate. Having lost trust in Fontaine, Chaldeus only deepened his dependence on Ymir. That dependence accelerated Ymir's dissipation. Dresses, jewels, nightly banquets, card gambling, and construction of multiple villas. She even begged Chaldeus to appoint nobles she favored to key posts. The nation fell into disorder, and the debt swelled. At that point, aid from other countries became necessary. And he had to tell Ymir that he had to marry an official queen from another country. If he didn't, the treasury would run dry. Ymir said she wouldn't mind at all, and she truly loved her life here. She said she could get along with the queen if things could stay this way. And so, Eremia, the third princess of Telesia, was welcomed as Chaldeus's queen, while the fact that the king had a destined mate was kept secret. To proceed with Lady Eremia's installation while hiding the mate's existence was a grave betrayal. Fontaine questioned whether he was wrong to persuade Chaldeus, yet they could never accept that woman as the mother of the nation. One day, Ymir asked Fontaine why he thought she wore such a childish hairstyle, because once she let her hair down, she was no longer the lady mate. While approaching Fontaine, she said that this would be her first time sleeping with someone with black hair because the village she came from was full of redheads. Fontaine threw her hand and told her not to touch him. He said she had no shame for thinking he would betray the king. In this filthy world, a single pure girl descended in his eyes. Her eyes were like a clear lake, silver hair shining like fresh snow, a figure worthy of being called a gem. Her beautiful, fragile appearance made his chest ache to think of her harsh circumstances. Even when he told about the mate, she bore herself with strength, but he saw that wounded profile. Neglected by the king, she lost herself wandering in the palace allotted to her. Fontaine couldn't understand why the nobles failed to foresee that she might follow the former queen's tragedy. It was self-satisfaction, but he blocked, as much as he could, the slanders the lady mate tried to spread about her. He fancied himself protecting a delicate princess. That notion was overturned when he witnessed her acting while disguised as a maid. Even then, he only thought she was a stronger-willed, more mischievous princess than he expected and realized that was his condescension and pride. When she reached out to someone far beneath her station, knelt on hard cobblestones and tore her own clothes to give without hesitation, it was a scene like a sublime painting. Surya, who after ascending the throne carried out fierce purges and shone with charisma like the sun. Freya, versed in agronomy and pharmacology, who wiped out many crop diseases and was called the goddess of plenty. In the shadow of those radiant elder sisters, the third princess was called mediocre in everything. That was Princess Eremia, yet he thought her broad, compassionate heart was precisely what befits the true sovereign of a new era. Fontaine went to see Eremia and wanted to tell her an old story of his today. Fontaine told her the hidden history of their kingdom, and Eremia was shaken. Eremia felt so bad for calling the maid a concubine in front of someone with such a past. Fontaine told her that no matter what King Chaldeus endured, the king's treatment of her could not be forgiven, and her anger was rightful. He knelt in front of her and asked for forgiveness on behalf of the king. Eremia accepted his apology. Fontaine then said he saw in her the hope to guide Chaldeus into a better nation. If the king accepts her and feels her nobility, his heart might change. For that, he wanted to protect her and wanted her to allow him to choose her guards. He said he would pick only those truly worthy of trust. Eremia agreed to this plan but wanted the appointment to be in her name. If his name was used, it would cause friction, and they must not rouse needless suspicion in the king. At night, Eremia was still thinking about what Fontaine told her. The incident with the former king was over 10 years ago. Chaldeus had spent vast sums to keep it from reaching other nations. It was no surprise that the king didn't know, but she couldn't believe the majesty of Telesia sent her here without knowing. Surya, her older sister, must have intended for her to discover this truth on her own and see what decision she would make. She thought about what a mate truly was. Whether it existed or not, it disrupts hearts and nations. Farmers tied to the land rarely meet there. The ones with a chance were merchants who traveled for trade and nobles with leisure to journey. But if they find a mate after marriage, it causes chaos in succession and inheritance. Beastkin make up 80% of Chaldeus' people. If she were to seize and rule this kingdom, she must learn more about mates. Eremia called Helma for the first time since the incident. She was quite surprised and thanked her from the bottom of her heart. But Eremia could see that her face seemed displeased. Eremia asked what she thought of the existence of mates. She said it was wonderful. In her view, one need only look at the king and Lady Ymir. She asked if she wished to find a mate herself, and she said yes, though she knew how difficult it was and the king truly strove hard for that. So even without good governance, simply for finding a mate, Chaldeus was a king worth supporting in the eyes of Beastkin. And if you're a noble, untaxed on their wealth, that goes double. However, in Carla's view, it was foolish. Eremia confessed that she was very cool-headed. She wanted to know why she called it foolish. She said it was because it had no will. She had heard that even beastmen who had already chosen a partner and built a family would abandon it all the moment they found their true mate, to easily destroy their ties with family and others just for their own desires. That was not something a rational person would do. Eremia asked if she wasn't a beastkin herself, and she didn't answer. She then decided that she had asked so much and told her to forget it. But Eremia knew she had that presence about her. On the other hand, Eureka said it was something wonderful. Eremia wondered if that was how people would answer in there. And yet there was something hesitant in it. He asked if she was the Duke Gentile's mate, and she said she wasn't. She asked what she would do if the Duke found his mate and declared he would take her as his true wife. She said she might feel relieved. After that night, Haku came and told her to leave the rest to them. If she goes around asking openly, it could become a scandal. The nobles of this court thrive on gossip, and it terrified her. Already after the assassin incident, some call her the cold-blooded queen. Haku wanted to crush every one of their throats. She told him to restrain himself. To know the beastkin and to know mates, she decided that she must know this country. She recalled what Fontaine told her the other day. The next day, she received a letter. The letter was from Bradley Gentile. In the next scene, Bradley Gentile was in Eremia's room greeting her. She said he was jest and a regent was meant for when the heir to the throne was underage or when the king was bedridden. King Chaldeus was of age and in good health, so there should no longer be any regent in this kingdom. She asked if he was mocking her or if he meant to declare, even to the queen, wife of the king, that true power still lay with him. She said that no duke would be so shameless. Gentile didn't expect her to be this clever and straightforward. He thought her a meek little girl when he heard she was driven to a distant palace and said to spend her days reading. But she was a cunning fox. Gentile apologized for his rudeness and mentioned that she had met his foster daughter, Ymir. Eremia smiled and said she was such a charming young lady. He said that she was his pride and joy. Though a commoner, she had received the king's deepest affection, and as her foster father, he took great pride in that. Eremia knew he meant to mock her, that though she was queen, she did not have his majesty's affection. Eremia mentioned that Ymir was so kind, and she even gifted her 3 maids, saying it was the duty of the noble-born. The duty of the noble-born meant that those with rank and wealth must bestow charity on those below. Surely in the noble ranks of duke, marquis, count, viscount, and baron, the duke stands highest, and above even that were the king and queen. She asked if it could be the duke's foster daughter didn't know this. She said she was innocent, naive, and charming, but clearly in need of more education. Duke Gentile was grinding his teeth because of this shameful moment. He said that he was most grateful that his daughter had received her wise correction, and that they were going to treasure it dearly. He wanted her to continue to favor them with her guidance. She said she would keep that in mind. Gentile wished to use Ymir's favor with the king as a cudgel to pressure her. but instead it was his daughter who smeared mud on his face. The next day, Fontaine brought the first guard for Eremia. His name was Chevalier. He said he was still young, but his swordsmanship was unmatched and he was a man of deep loyalty. His skill rivals even that of the Knights Commander, and there was no one more fitting to protect the queen. Eremia thanked Fontaine and said she would like to speak with him alone for a while. Fontaine left them alone. Chevalier asked what she wished to speak with him, and she only said the name Norn. She knew that was his foster sister's name. Shocked, Chevalier asked how she knew this. She said this was going to be a painful story for him, and she had his background investigated beforehand. Norn was the child his mother found in the mountains, and she was a demon. In this land, some nobles abduct demons to use their powers, keeping them as slaves. Even beastkin, once prized for their looks, were enslaved in weakness, even though Cardias abolished slavery long ago. In Eremia's homeland, slavery and human trafficking were also forbidden. Chevalier said that was how it should be, and that no one should ever buy and sell another human being. Eremia continued, saying that his mother hid Norn's true race and raised her as her own so she might grow safely. But when Norn came of age and her powers grew, the secret leaked. A noble tried to seize her and his mother was slaughtered, and that noble was slain by his enraged father. By rights it was self-defense. But because his house stood below that noble in rank, he was forced instead to pay compensation. The Count of Hoyerldy covered the debt, but demanded Norn in repayment. Chevalier confirmed what she said and said that Norn thought herself to blame for her mother's death and went without resistance. As a child, Chevalier felt powerless to stop it. He said he was a weak man, and if the queen judged him unfit to guard her, he would be okay. But Eremia stated that she was going to take Norn back herself. Shocked, Chevalier asked the reason. She said that she wanted him to swear his life to serve her in exchange, and reminded him that she would not forgive betrayal. By status and record, Chevalier was not a man fit to guard the queen. And yet Count Hoyerldy was a Gentile ally. Looking at the facts, the tragedy that befell Chevalier's family must have been Hoyerldy's doing. A man with such a grudge would never side with Gentile, and amid nobles fell in greed. Only Fontaine truly strives for this nation's future and cares about Eremia, so if he trusts this man, Eremia would too. She knew Chevalier had his own reasons and burdens, but his eyes, his strong words, his hatred of wicked nobles, his reverence for like, and his keen skill in gathering information made her believe that she could entrust him with her sword and her life. At night, Helma knocked on Ymir's door and she let her in. She asked how life was as the queen's maid. Helma responded that it was stifling and boring because all she did was read every day. She wears either her Talesian dress or the plainest loungewear. 2 weeks after washing, she would wear the same outfit again. As for Ymir, no way she could wear the same dress for 3 months straight. Helma said she was the flower of the court. But the queen, because the king refused to present her, wasn't invited to any banquets or tea parties. So since no one notices her, she didn't even need many dresses. And she said she had got even juicier story. She mentioned that the queen asked her what a mate was and claimed she was jealous of her beautiful bond of love with the king. She was sure Eremia was driven mad with envy. Ymir agreed that this was truly an amusing story. 1 week later, knights raided the queen's villa, asking maids where the queen was. They tried to stop them, but they even captured one of the maids as a hostage, threatening to cut her head if the queen didn't come. Eremia heard the noises and decided to show up, but Chevalier told her that it was dangerous. But she couldn't let her be abandoned and told Chevalier to protect her to the end. When she showed up, the knights told her that she was under suspicion of plotting the assassination of the mate, and they hereby placed her under arrest. Chevalier stood in front of the queen to protect her and told the knights not to lay a single finger on the queen. Anyone who dares harm her highness shall be cut down by him, Chevalier. The knight tried to leave and Chevalier stopped him. He dared to enter the queen's residence without permission and thought he would leave alive. The knight had no shame and told Eremia that she was the despised queen and that he didn't need her permission. She calmly asked what he meant by that. He said that all of the king's favor belonged to his mate, and everyone in the kingdom knew the queen was unloved. He said that the moment she plotted an assassination, she was finished. Eremia told the knight that, with those insults he was saying against her, even if others forgave him, her sister Surya would not. Surya, the current queen of Telesia, within a year of her reign, without regard for noble or commoner, executed over 100 who engaged in human trafficking, robbery, murder, or drug dealing, and she was sure he knew of it. She said that even without setting foot on Telesia, the sword of justice and the sun would strike down the heads of sinners. Since the castle search should be under Fontaine's command, she told them to inform him at once. All documents with Telesia's officials were magically sent back the same day by Haku, and Haku leaves no magical trace behind. Assassination plot against the mate was completely news to her, but there must be forged documents. It had only been a month since she entered Cardias, and since Chaldeus never brings her to public events, it should be difficult to acquire any documents with her handwriting there. Chevalier was frustrated and didn't want to leave there because Eremia was inside a cell, but the knights told him to shut up and claimed that he slept with the queen to become her guard. Eremia ordered them to stop and said she would not allow them to insult her knight. She said that Chevalier would abide by the king's decision and told him to stand down. Even the cell guard didn't want to lock the queen in such a shabby cell. There was no way he would do something so terrible because he would be executed for treason. The knight who arrested Eremia told him to do it because the one here was a criminal who must be punished. But the man didn't believe it. He said that he had never seen someone this beautiful in his life, and there was no way she would think of something as horrible as assassination. The knight mentioned that she had been harassing the king's mate, but he said that was a lie, and there were rumors that the mate bullied the queen instead. The knight took out his sword to kill the man, but Eremia stopped him, saying she wouldn't allow blood to be spilled before her. She went inside the cell and thanked the man for believing her. She said that she was innocent, but if he disobeyed the king's command, he would lose his life, so he should lock the cell. She even promised to testify to protect him if he were ever accused of treason. Trusting the words of the queen, the man locked her up. She gave him a bracelet saying it would protect him from one physical attack. With his status, he might be cut down by soldiers before ever reaching the courtroom. Eremia asked Haku if he minded, but he said that was only insurance, and she could use it however she wanted. The man kissed the bracelet and couldn't help but cry over how kind she was. He gave her a blanket and straw because she must be cold. He said he would make sure the fire didn't go out. Meanwhile, Fontaine had already seen the truth. He was holding the Ymir Gentile assassination plan report, and it was so obvious that it was a sloppy forgery. First, the handwriting on the queen's signature didn't match, and no one would sign an assassination plan to begin with. Second, she was from Telesia, so there was no way she would use the Cardias language in such a secret document. However, with all that evidence, the king decided that she would be executed. Fontaine told him that he had just proven beyond doubt that the document was forged. Merely being suspected of plotting Ymir's assassination was a crime in itself, and he could not judge someone for such a reason. But Caldius didn't listen to him and ordered him to find other evidence if the document was forged. Fontaine asked why he would go that far and begged him to think calmly. If he executes the queen without solid proof, the alliance with Telesia would collapse, and that would be no different from destroying this kingdom. The king was sick of Fontaine talking about the country, the nobles, and the people. He asked him if he ever even once truly blessed Ymir and him from his heart. He tried to explain to him, but he said that this country didn't bless them and there was no reason for him to show concern for this country. Even so, he was the king and he was born to be, and if he failed his duty as the king, only ruin awaited him. They were raised by the same nurse and Fontaine watched over them since they were children. As his vassal and friend, he always wished for his happiness, and yet his words, his feelings, no longer reached him. A decree came from the king, and Eremia was informed that an assassination plan document had been found, and if she confessed, there might be leniency. Eremia stated that she was innocent, and she demanded a trial to let the law expose the truth to the light of day. The news of the trial spread through the city, and everyone was wondering who would win. In the next scene, the writer's mother was in panic because her son called Ymir a mistress. He comfortably responded to his mother that the mistress was mistress, and even if she was just a duke's daughter who rose from commoner blood. Besides, maid is an old-fashioned word these days. By the time they were newborns, beast instincts didn't even show unless they were really riled up. He only ever thinks he wanted a mate for a few weeks in spring, and that's all. The mother told him that the emperor was the beast folk's long-cherished dream and everyone should revere Lady Ymir and the king. The son told her that they couldn't even afford tomorrow's bread. He said that papers full of the mate scandals sell like hotcakes these days. He said times were changing and tickets to watch the mate trial would be a bloodbath to get. When her son left, the mother was still devastated because the mate was supposed to be their hope, their ideal. When the king married his mate, this country was supposed to get better. But even after the mate appeared, their lives didn't get better. Meanwhile, Eremia's attorney had arrived for a meeting. As her attorney, Haku arrived and introduced himself as Charles Burmer, and stated that he would serve as her defense attorney. He secretly told her that the true Burmer was working for the king, and he put him to sleep and tied him up in a hidden room. He had made it so only she could see his true form. With her permission, he was going to serve as her true defense, but on the surface he told her to treat him as if they had just met. Eremia stated that she would count on him. Still, seeing Haku in Cardia's attire was so cute. Haku told him that the king had declared that if she confessed, her punishment would be light, so he asked if she would intend to plead not guilty. Eremia stated that she was innocent and that she would plead not guilty. Meanwhile, they were talking about how Cardia's clothing was so tight. At present, there was only one witness willing to testify to her innocence. Most servants were too afraid of King Caldius to take the stand. Carla and Eureka stepped forward, but Eureka was unwell and unlikely to recover. Eureka was a delicate woman, Having a soldier press a sword to her throat was a difficult position for the Duchess of Gentile, and they couldn't pressure her. It was more surprising that Carla volunteered at all. Her background was still unknown and caution was needed. Eremia told Haku that if they assumed this incident was Ymir's own scheme, she wondered what her goal might be. Even if this trial disgraces her and removes her as queen, since King Chaldeus hasn't silenced the nobles opposed to making Ymir queen, another queen would simply be brought in from abroad. She can never be queen. In fact, she didn't think Ymir wanted to be. As she sat there in this cell, thinking deeply about her, she began to feel Ymir harbor some terrible desire within her. Haku said she might be overthinking, but she said she would keep it in mind. In one of the bars in the city, people were talking about who believed whom. Some said the queen would do that because she was shut away in that villa, left all alone, and it was only natural she would hold a grudge. But some heard that the queen was meek and quiet, yet she supposedly fought back and defeated assassins. For citizens starved of entertainment, a trial, especially one steeped in royal scandal, was the ultimate show. Underground, gambling on the mate trial thrived. Before the hearings, bets heavily favored Ymir. Her wasteful habits and other bad rumors never ceased, but as the king's mate, as a beast woman with portraits of her spread everywhere, her beauty was well known. By contrast, Eremia was a princess from a faraway land, never formally presented. Her portrait never even hung in the royal gallery. She was shrouded in mystery, and so she had little popularity. With that, the first day of the trial arrived. The Gentile faction with Ymir as their adopted daughter and the king's mate was the same as the royalist faction. Meanwhile, the anti-Gentile and anti-royalist factions had no powerful leader and remained disorganized. To unite them into a force strong enough to stand against the others, Eremia must become their leader and form a queen's faction. Therefore, she must gain the Supreme Court holders of royal legal authority as her allies. Eremia was dedicated to turning this crisis into an opportunity. In front of the Supreme Court, long lines formed as people clamored for gallery tickets. The people in there were surprised to see the king and his mate beside him. They would often be seen together at operas and soirees, but this was their first appearance together in public. Yet what stole the people's gaze even more than the king and his mate was the queen. Even though she was dressed in such shabby clothes, she was so dignified and regal. Haku noted in his head to make Ymir regret making her wear such rags. Compared to the queen, who stood tall and proud even in poor clothes, Ymir's gaudy finery looked garishly out of place in the courtroom. The trial started with stating the outline of this case. On April 24th at around 3 p.m., Lady Ymir was strolling through the harem gardens with 3 maids and 2 attendants. A suspicious man suddenly appeared and attacked her. He was quickly subdued by guards and disarmed. While restrained, he hurled insults at the mate and attempted to bite his tongue, so he was gagged. Under interrogation, he gave his name as Nicholas Lamotte. He confessed that Queen Eremia ordered him to assassinate the mate and that he received 30 gold coins as payment, presenting a copy of the assassination plan. The next day, under the Chancellor's orders, guards searched the Queen's palace and found the plan. Since it matched Nicholas's copy, Queen Eremia Klusner was arrested. Eremia was asked if she had any statement regarding those matters. Eremia stated that she never plotted any assassination, nor had she ever met this Nicholas Lamotte. Haku stated that there were many suspicious points in the assassination plan presented as evidence. The handwriting didn't match. A signature appeared, though it was an assassination plan. And Queen Eremia, from Telesia, would never use Cardia's script in such a secret document without any code. The defense called its witness, and Carla came. Carla swore to speak only the truth and started talking. She said that Queen Eremia wakes around 11, has lunch, then spends the afternoon reading and studying languages. If requested by the court ladies, she practices singing and harp and piano, continuing without pause until dinner. At 8 she dines, at 9 she bathes, and at 10 she retires. During this time, either head Madi Eurekael, Deputy Helma, or she, Carla, was always at her side. Even after bedtime, one of them keeps watch without sleeping. Since entering Cardias, the queen had never broken this routine. Under such constant supervision, she couldn't conspire with an intruder. Even the absent headmaid Eureka, who was unwell, had testified to this. On April 2nd at 9 p.m. when the incident occurred, Her Highness was in her chambers studying languages, and she was with her then. The judge asked if the prosecution had objections, and they called a witness. As she thought it was Helma. The judge asked if she was going to accuse Eremia even though she was meant to be Her Highness's maid. She said she would for justice. She said that by Carla's testimony, it seemed the queen had no chance to meet assassins, but there was an exception. Shameful though it was, after the attempted assassination she was punished with a week's suspension for failing to notice the intruder. During that week she claimed that Carla and she had conspired to bring Nicholas and plot the assassination. Haku objected because it was pure speculation, and besides, the headmaid was Duchess Gentile, the mate's stepmother, and she would never aid an assassination. After that, the prosecution summoned a second witness, and it was the man who didn't want to put Eremia in the cell. The judge asked the witness what the matter was, but the witness was still silent. Others ordered him to speak. Eremia was sure that the prosecution bribed or threatened him. The man said that Queen Eremia in the cell he guarded was constantly bad-mouthing the mate and his majesty. She was especially cruel toward the mate. He said that Eremia said as vile and stubborn as those glossy bugs. See one and there were hundreds, and a thing like that deserved to die. He then screamed that someone told him to testify like that in exchange for those 30 gold coins. Everyone was shocked, except Eremia. The man told the truth, saying the real queen kept smiling even in a musty cell, said the thin soup was tasty and ate it, and thanked him whenever he changed her sheets and blankets. And except at mealtimes, she read a cardiology scripture the whole time. In his block, it was mostly nobles who had gravely angered his majesty who got jailed. Without fail, they rang and rant, cursing him and the king. But Her Highness the Queen threw their meals and yanked his arms and hair through the bars, no matter how stubborn. Even in prison, she was as graceful and calm as a goddess. She never spoke ill of the mate, nor of his majesty who imprisoned her. He couldn't possibly believe someone like her would plot an assassination, and he had come to think this was actually staged by the mate to frame the queen. He claimed that the woman who handed him those coins was sent by the mate. King Chaldeus immediately ordered the guards to seize him at once and take his head for insulting his mate. But when the guard took out his knife and swung to cut his throat, the knife broke into pieces. The man said that this was the queen's mercy. He showed them the bracelet the queen gave him and said she feared his life, foresaw this, and bestowed it on him. This bracelet was proof of Her Majesty's compassion and innocence. The townspeople were convinced now, and they started cheering for the queen. The judge shushed them and said that was all for today's proceedings. And furthermore, they cannot overlook her attempt to stain this sacred court with blood. The High Court indicts the reigning king for contempt of court and bars him from all courts until the conclusion of this case. King Chaldeus was shocked. With that, the court was adjourned. This was going down in history. The next day's papers all praised Eremia. The jailer incident was dubbed the Bracelet Affair, the miracle of the bracelet, and a tale of the queen's mercy and virtue. Citizens snapped up the pro-queen papers and street corners rang with cheers for her. Public anger over throwing the queen into a dungeon swelled, and Eremia was moved to proper noble quarters and given normal clothes. Eremia didn't expect it to turn out like this for sure. Haku asked if it was really troublesome. Even with such sudden fervent support, it didn't mean they truly held the public's heart. One misstep, and who knew what could happen? What irked her were the nobles flipping sides. Those who called her a cold-blooded queen now proclaimed themselves the queen's faction. But Haku was mostly satisfied that she was finally getting the credit she deserved. Eremia told him that he spoiled her too much. Haku took out a letter from the homeland addressed to her. After she read the letter, Eremia fainted. Freya was going to visit her soon and told her to wait for her. Worried, Haku asked what was going on. She said it was nothing serious, but it might become serious. She told him that her sister Freya was coming here to Cardias. And in the letter, there was no detail about how the meeting was going to be or when it was going to be. That was exactly the sort of person Freya was. And she didn't intend to inform them. She was planning to show up and surprise her. Haku suggested setting her aside for now. No one in this world could predict or control what she does anyway. First, they should prepare for the second trial. In the next scene, they were at the second trial of the attempted assassination of the Duke's daughter. The prosecution's claim regarding the defense's claim that the assassination plan may have been forged. It was written in Cardias script because Nicholas was a Urdaean. It was signed to gain Nicholas's trust. There was no code used because Nicholas, being a former kitchen apprentice, was uneducated and wouldn't understand. But the difference in handwriting of the signature cannot be ignored. Even if the body of the document was ghostwritten, the signature must be the queen's own hand. And in fact, the handwriting of the text and the signature differ, so the prosecution compared it to documents directly handwritten by the queen, received after the first trial. They concluded the signature was forged. At this time, the prosecution called another witness. It was Helma. The attorney asked if she was given a week's suspension and confined to her quarters. He then asked if she had met anyone during that time. She said she only met with the maid who brought her meals. He asked if there was anyone who could prove she stayed in her room besides those times. She said no. They then asked for the next witness. He confirmed that he was offered 30 gold coins to perjure himself about the queen's behavior in prison. The attorney asked if he remembered what the person who asked him looked like. He said their hood was pulled low, so their face was covered. But from their build and voice it was a young woman, and some red hair curled out from the hood near her cheek. They thanked him and called for Nicholas Lamotte, a former kitchen apprentice. He confirmed that on April 24th around 3 p.m. he snuck into the harem gardens and attacked the mate with a dagger. They then asked if it was directly ordered by the queen here. He said no, and explained that he saw the queen's face for the first time here. He had never even seen her portrait. They asked if it was someone claiming to be her messenger who hired him. He said that was true. He then confirmed that that person gave him 30 gold coins and the plan, leading to the crime. He asked if he remembered what the person looked like. He said they wore a hooded cloak so he couldn't see much, but from the voice it was a young woman, and there was a red hair near her cheek. It was such striking, unusual red hair, and that's why he remembered it. Helma was trembling in fear. They asked the prosecutor what the meaning of these testimonies so far was. Both of the last two witnesses were given 30 gold coins by a young red-haired woman who asked them to assassinate and perjure. The prosecution concluded this was the same woman. He asked if they had any proof. They investigated every scribe in the city, both legal and underground. As a result, a man named Reto Villette, who specializes in forging noble documents, confessed to writing the plan. Because of his shady trade, he met the red-haired woman without her good. They showed Reto a sketch of Helma Valois, and he testified that she was without a doubt the client. Therefore, the prosecution withdrew the charges against Queen Eremia Klusner and instead indicted Lady Helma Valois for orchestrating the mate's assassination attempt and for insulting the royal family. The citizens were so happy that the queen was innocent. But Eremia realized that she wasn't the only target. Ymir hated all royalty and nobles. Helma had been arrested and imprisoned during the second trial as a new suspect in the attempted assassination of the duke's daughter case. Eremia went to ask her plainly. She asked if she wasn't involved in the assassination plot. According to the prosecution, Helma staged a fake attempt on the first consort's life to frame the queen, or so they claimed, and Helma had confessed to the crime. Helma was shocked that she was considering this. Eremia told her that the first suspicion came from the prosecutor's testimony. When Nicholas was seized by the guards, he allegedly spat insults at the consort. Then, according to the public records, Nicholas's motive wasn't just the order from someone claiming to act on the queen's behalf. Back when he worked in the harem fetching water for banquets, he confessed that spilling just a few drops on the floor earned Ymir's wrath and cost him his position. But Helma, who was close enough to Ymir to be called by name, couldn't truly have entrusted such a dangerous act to someone who might harm him. And at the first trial, when she stood in the witness box, she said her testimony was against her, and it was for the sake of justice. That wasn't something a person who knowingly fabricated an assassination would say. Above all, she served faithfully in her palace. She supported Lady Eurycle, unaccustomed to maid work, and managed many tasks within the palace. She acted as the de facto head maid, yet never sought the position for herself. She knew she disliked her and that she likely kept ties with Ymir, but even so, she couldn't believe her heart was twisted enough to plot something as vile as assassination. Helma was ashamed and devastated that she thought of her so kindly. And she noticed her work, watching her heart so closely. She asked if she would hear her story. Lady Ymir was born poor. When first taken into the harem, she was so thin she didn't need a corset, with no chest to speak of. She always had to stuff her dress at the bust. Naturally, the court ladies scorned her. They told her that her skin and hair were like a wasteland. They covered her up for her and said it was as if flowers were blooming inside her head. And Helma was there, seeing everything but couldn't say anything. Things changed once the king began visiting the consort frequently. The very next day, that woman's husband was stripped of rank and lands. And so, using King Chaldeus's favor, Lady Ymir struck down all who mocked her at court. The longer she lived in the palace, the healthier her complexion grew. Each day she became more beautiful and arrogant. Helma was entranced, watching her blossom into a wicked queen. One day she had chosen the exact hairstyle that other women made fun of and said she would simply have the heads of anyone who dared to laugh at it. As she let her call her name and she grew closer, she felt like a special maid, but in her heart something nagged at her. She feared deep down that Lady Ymir would never forgive her. And that day she realized that she truly despised her. It was only natural she hated her, for she had once mocked her. That's why she confessed. So since she couldn't bring Eremia down, Ymir schemed to bring Helma down instead, using another red-haired young woman just like her. Now that they had admitted her charge was false, the prosecution would stop at nothing to prevent her acquittal. They would find evidence, use any means to win a conviction. Eremia was gaining support, but the queen's faction had only just been born. She didn't yet have the power to secure her innocence. She told her to claim instead that she loved Ymir so much she staged the assassination for her sake, and she would refuse the charge of insulting the royal family. If Eremia the queen were falsely accused, do not condemn her. Public opinion would hesitate to condemn her. Helma was shocked and asked why she would do that. She scorned her and testified against her. Eremia responded that she was doing this for justice. On May 30th, Helma Valois was declared guilty. As the queen refused the charges, they were reduced to riot and fraud. By surrendering a third of the Valois Viscounty's lands, she was granted a suspended sentence. Helma was sent to a convent. Meanwhile, Freya arrived at Cardias. She was so excited to see her little Eremia. In the next scene, Ymir was informed that Her Highness Freya, the second princess of Telesia, had entered the country, and they needed to come up with countermeasures immediately. Ymir was confused as to why she couldn't leave the harem and had to put up with this for that Telesian princess, Eremia's sister. Fontaine asked her to endure it for a while. In a modernizing international society, Cardias's fated mate custom was outdated. Above all, the king's mate was kept secret from other nations. To the sudden visit Freya of Telesia, they said the harem was closed in preparation for large-scale renovations, and Eremia was temporarily using a detached palace during the work. Lady Freya thanked King Chaldius for allowing this sudden visit. This was the first day that Chaldius and Eremia stood together in the audience hall. King Chaldius welcomed Princess Freya. He said he too wished to meet her, the illustrious sister of his wife. That was the first time he had called Eremia that. King Chaldius's face was awfully stiff. He would probably rather die than call her wife. Even Fontaine, who spoils the king, must have talked him into it this time. Freya told Eremia to support the king well and be a good wife. Taxes were for the people's livelihood and the nation's development. They were not for her luxuries, and she must remember that when she buys dresses and jewels. If the king was in good health, she was not to interfere in politics, and she told her not to beg for promotions for her favorite courtiers. Fontaine was sure that Freya had been using spies to keep tabs on the consort. She said she intends for their sisters to go greet her beloved sister's country and its people. Fontaine noticed that she knew they hadn't even done a joint royal greeting. She means to use this chance to present Lady Eremia to the people. It was said that the queen's popularity was already overheated because of the bracelet incident, and now the sisters wanted to venture into the city together. But Princess Freya had certainly noticed the consort's existence. If they refuse, it is as good as her saying she would spread it abroad. They wanted to at least arrange them to go somewhere outside the capital. In the next scene, Freya and Eremia's big cleaning operation started. They went to the slums and started cleaning them. The people there were shocked. They heard that it was the grace of Her Highness Freya, second princess of Telesia. Buckets and water jars had been set in the central square. Anyone may use them to wash at her order. They told the people to use the towels freely, and there was soap for them as well. Some of the kids didn't even know what a soap was. Freya explained that this was called soap, and she could wash her hands and body with it, and it would help her protect herself from illness. She then asked Eremia if the water was boiling. She told her to cool it to a good temperature, soak the towels, wring them out, and bring them. They helped the ill and poor with those. They distributed blankets, sheets, and clothing. There was plenty, so it was enough for anyone. The people were feeling clean for the first time in years. They had clothes and shoes without holes. Eremia said she thought she would be handing out food when she heard she was visiting the slums. Freya responded that food was important for sure, but hygiene mattered too. Of the three basic human drives, the strongest was the need for sleep. Hygiene was closely tied to sleep. Sleeping in a tidy room with clean sheets and blankets gives great vigor. If you hand in bread, it will be gone by tomorrow. Encouraging people here to find work and buy their own bread leads to long-term support. Eremia was amazed by how her sister was so free-spirited. She was always swept along by her sudden inspirations. But even so, she respected her from the bottom of her heart and truly admired her. The next day, bread and soup were handed out. Then Freya and Eremia were warmly welcomed by the people of Cardias. Their service in the slums was widely reported in the newspapers from then on. They talked about how they dressed like servant girls and brought a ton of servants from Telesia. They cleaned up and handed out soup. And when the queen herself lifted a grandchild just to change the bed sheets, they nearly had a heart attack. They both kept smiling the whole time. They were now sure that the newspaper story about the bracelet was true after all. And yet, when it came to the king and his mate, that feeling of doubt began to spread all through Cardias. And then, art dealers got their hands on portraits of Freya and Eremia, and the copies sold like wildfire. They were so happy to get the queen's portrait, and they all hung it in the best spot in their houses. Even the palace was swept up in an unprecedented Telesia-style craze. There were ornaments, dresses patterned with peonies, and fans imported from Telesia too. Their country and Telesia were bound together by affection now. They wanted to hear about Freya's time in Telesia. She said she mostly spends her time in fields and laboratories. She wasn't sure if she had stories that would delight the ladies. They were excitedly listening to her and would like to hear stories about her and her sister Eremia. She said that compared to her two other sisters, she didn't have any talents and she just spent all her time reading books. Day by day, more nobles began calling themselves the Queen's faction, or Pro-Telesia. At this point, the royal mate was all but forgotten, and Ymir was so angry. She asked her father-in-law how long Freya was planning on staying. He told Ymir that it was a long journey from Telesia to Cardias, so they could not expect her to just head back after a week, and she cannot call her that woman. Princess Freya was generous enough to let most courtiers call her by name, but even as a duke's daughter born a commoner, her bloodline was pure royalty. Still, Ymir said she was the king's mate. Her father-in-law told her that the value of being a mate meant nothing outside of beastfolk. Her honor vanishes the moment she steps outside Cardias. Outside this country, no one would call her royal mate. She started crying, saying she knew that much, and hugged him. Ymir made no effort to gain the refinement or education of a lady. If anything, she lives in debauchery, earning only the people's resentment. He adopted her to sell her to the king, so he was thinking about disposing of her. In the next scene, Haku came and informed Lady Eremia that they had obtained records of human trafficking by court Hoyerldi. Freya greeted Haku and he apologized for the delayed meeting. She said that was fine because he was like a brother to Eremia after all. Eremia wanted to hear the details because her knight's younger sister was among them. About 10 years ago, the cousin Surya adored died. It was labeled a sudden death, but from the circumstances, it was definitely an assassination. Surya's grief was deep. Come to think of it, Surya deliberately began to change herself from that day on. There had been assassinations targeting underage heirs to the throne, and any of them, sisters, could be next. They had tasters, but sometimes they were bribed, so they were going to keep taking weak doses to build up resistance. Freya apprenticed with an apothecary to have this specially prepared, and then she reformulated it herself. Having the apothecary prescribe it directly would be after, but that would drag him into this. This had to be something the sisters started themselves. Freya and Eremia had already taken it. So the reason her older sister was down with high fevers the other day was because of this poison. Freya asked Eremia if she would take it. And now Eremia, disguised as a boy, and asked Haku about his opinion. He said it suited her really well. 1 month ago, at the Norn Rescue Operation meeting, Eremia stated that slaves cannot escape on their own at first. They were forced to live on rags and scraps called only by marks or numbers, robbed of their dignity as humans. If they tried to resist or run, they were given brutal beatings and unbearable abuse to instill fear. They were forced into brutal labor until exhaustion dulled their judgment. This was how slaves became enslaved down to their very souls. Just opening their cells wouldn't make them take a single step on their own. They had to guide them carefully and prepare enough carriages, drivers, safe houses, and caretakers, or they would be easily recaptured. They could sue based on the human trafficking records, but trials take time. If the slaves were hidden away or disposed of in the meantime, it would all be for nothing. So they were going to prepare meticulously and seize the slaves themselves. They were going to sue Count Hoyerldi afterward. Haku came, they finally met Chevalier. He said he had always sensed some presence around the queen, but it didn't feel hostile, rather like a will to protect her, so he thought it wasn't his place to interfere. Haku offered his hand and said he was a man worth watching. Eremia explained to Chevalier that Haku belonged to a clan of covert agents who had served the Talisian royal family for generations, and he was a demon. Now that he knew Haku, there was no turning back for him. Indeed, if a demon was involved, falsifying documents or manufacturing witnesses was easy. But he believed in the queen's innocence and promised not to betray her. He said that they needed manpower to free the slaves, yet the more people involved, the more chances for the plan to leak. Since they too had demons, they were going to use Haku. First, they were going to exploit a gap in Count Hoyerldi's defenses to break into the castle, free the slaves, and lead them to the carriages. Chevalier was in charge of identifying, guiding, and escorting the slaves. If they get them safely outside the castle, Haku would use his magic to send the prepared carriages and drivers to transport the slaves straight to the neighboring country. After that, she was going to entrust the slaves to a noble she was friendly with in the neighboring country. Once given new identities and work abroad, it would be hard to retrieve them. And if they ruin Count Hoyerldi in court, he will have no rights over those slaves. Chevalier asked what she was going to do about exploiting a gap, and she said that was her responsibility. After that, she went to Miss Michelle Hoyerldi. Seeing her pale skin, eyes clear like a still lake, and delicate profile, she immediately figured that this person was a woman, though she dressed up as a man. She asked who she was. Eremia said she was a lovely person, but someone who must not forget her. She asked if it would make it clear if she said the only woman fit to sit properly beside this country's king. Miss Michelle immediately knew she was the queen. She said she would never forget meeting her that day at the mates' tea party. She thought she was an incredibly beautiful person. And then, before long, she dreamed of how wonderful it would be if such a lovely person dressed as a man. Eremia said she was so glad that she remembered her. Michelle asked what was with that appearance. She said she couldn't forgive her either, so she wanted to know more about her. She heard she adored those kinds of tastes, dressing up your servants as men, even holding cross-dressing parties with her friends. She was embarrassed that Eremia knew this much about her. Eremia said even her bashfulness was adorable. Back to the meeting 1 month ago, Eremia told them that Michelle loved beautiful women dressed as men, so she was going to dress as a man and seduce her. Haku asked if she even knew how to seduce a woman. She said she didn't, but if she just praises her and makes her feel good, that should work. Haku asked how she was going to praise her. She said he would say the way her wrist bends when she swings a sword was beautiful. Haku reminded her that normal young ladies didn't swing swords. Eremia was annoyed that Haku didn't believe her. He said she was dense when it comes to romance. Chevalier couldn't help but giggle after seeing them fight like siblings. This was the first time she had seen him laugh. She said that they were like brother and sister, and it was so heartwarming that he couldn't help it. It made him think of himself and Norn. Chevalier said Lady Michelle had blonde hair and violet eyes, saying golden hair shining like ripened wheat, eyes delicate in color like a child's blossom, or I have fallen for both the goddess of harvest and a spring fairy, struck with sinful sweet pain might work. Even Haku was embarrassed after those compliments. They asked where he learned such devastating lines. He said her parents had a love marriage. His father sent his mother countless passionate letters. He found them while sorting through his belongings, and he read them over and over. Even as a child, he was moved by his fiery feelings. Eremia didn't want to waste that talent and asked him to teach her every pickup line he could think of. He started right away, but Eremia was saying it too flatly. Back to the present, Eremia asked if she had the right to ask her for a dance. She was embarrassed and said she wasn't worthy. She said she would host her and gather every servant in the house and hold a grand ball. They started dancing and Eremia kept flirting with her. If the queen herself comes disguised for their daughter's sake, the Hoyeraldi household would throw everything into preparing the ball. The guards on the slave cells would be thin, and even if they broke out, they couldn't let their existence be exposed to her or the guests, so they wouldn't be able to raise an alarm. They spend many days practicing dance with Eremia, and always taking the female part for a whole month finally pays off. Eremia told Haku that if he was dissatisfied, she could take the female role for another month of lessons. He immediately said no. Freya called Eremia and told her that if she took control of this country, she could free the slaves then. She asked if they really needed to free Count Hoyeraldi's slaves right away. She told him that this plan was to win Chevalier's trust. Because of Norn, Chevalier holds a grudge against Count Hoyeraldi, but on the other hand, if Norn were taken hostage, he might betray them. The only ones she truly trusted were Haku, Freya, and her other sisters. She wanted to nip and seeds of doubt in the bud. With that, the day of the ball arrived, and Eremia wore a beautiful tuxedo. At the Hoyeraldi castle, Michelle welcomed everyone and thanked them for coming. She asked them to sing, dance, and enjoy themselves to their heart's content tonight. She stated that in another room, their head chef had also prepared a fine banquet for them. And tonight, they were honored to welcome a very special guest. She said Her Majesty, the Queen of Cardias, Her Highness Queen Eremia Klusner was here. Everyone was shocked and amazed. They found her so gallant and beautiful at once. They wished they had worn a dress today so they could dance with her. Michelle noticed that her attire today was in the style of a Western island nation. Eremia asked Michelle to call her by her name. She said that this outfit was tailored today just for her. She wanted to give her a fresh surprise and asked her to have mercy on this heart of hers, struggling each day to hold on to its maiden's feelings. In the mansion, the young ladies were singing, dancing, drinking, and feasting, so the knights hoped they would get a share of the leftovers. Haku and Chevalier appeared right behind them and knocked them out. They head to the dungeons, and Chevalier notices something. The mansion had so much food prepared that the young ladies couldn't even finish it all. Yet the slaves were this emaciated. This was the true face of the house of Count Hoyeraldi. Even if he was just a powerless child back then, Chevalier felt so guilty for leaving Norn in the hands of this house. Haku told him that he was going to prepare the carriage and driver, and asked him to lead the slaves to the forest behind the mansion. 1 hour earlier, Haku had made him memorize the castle's map and take the faces of all the slaves. Haku was skilled in magic that manipulates human memory. He realized that almost all the slaves he had memorized were here, but Norn wasn't here. But time was critical, so he had to free the slaves who were here first. Using this magic power Haku gave him, he put the slaves into a trance and told them to hurry as fast as they could to the forest behind the mansion. The hypnosis seemed to be working. It had been a while since a slave thief showed up. At that moment he saw Norn, but she attacked him. He told her that it was Chevalier, and he had come to rescue them all. She said that she would not fall for such lies. Since she was taken into this house, he never came to see her once, didn't send a single letter, and he sold her off for his own sake. Chevalier explained that the Count forbade visits, and he sent so many letters, and the Count must have destroyed them. But Norn didn't believe him. She said that the one who raised her this far was the Count. Chevalier told her that her hands and legs had grown so thin. She must have been treated so cruelly, and yet she was siding with them. She said that slave thieves say things like that, then take slaves away, only to put them through even worse suffering. They lack limbs, pump them full of drugs, and burn them at the stake. Compared to that, the Count was merciful. He told her that she had the right to be happy and she didn't have to get used to living like this. But Norn didn't listen to him. She asked if he was saying he would save all 30+ slaves here by herself. Their family didn't have that kind of wealth. She said she wouldn't abandon everyone else just to save herself, and they had no choice but to live here. Eremia contacted Haku and said she would convince Norn. She had to switch with him. Michelle asked where she was going, and she said she had to step out for a bit. As they walked past each other in the hallway, they switched bodies. Eremia came to talk with Norn, and she was amazed by how beautiful she was. She introduced herself as the Queen of Cardias and said she had come to free them from the Count. The other slaves heard rumors about the king taking a queen from another country. But Norn didn't believe her. Eremia just gave her something to eat, and her stomach felt so full the moment she swallowed it. Her whole body was filled with strength. Eremia promised them food, clothing, and shelter, and provided work with fair wages, a life with warm meals, soft beds, free from hunger and cold. Now that they believed her and Norm was convinced, she decided that it was time to go. Eremia told Chevalier that people staring and racked by pain didn't have the clear judgment to think straight, and he couldn't save them just by throwing cold, hard truths at them. He knew that, but he thought he had already endured enough bitterness trying to join the knights with his family's dishonor. But he was naive. There were people in this world suffering this badly. The other slaves asked Eremia what she gave Norn to eat. They wanted some too. She said that they were magical pellets charged with mana. Someone without enough magical resilience might not withstand them. She gave them a small amount of restorative powder along with the hypnotic dust. They started to feel a bit lighter already. After explaining that, she told them to get into the carriage. But Norm started to cry because she thought she couldn't go. She helped with so many master's crimes when she was a child. Even after she understood what she was doing, she was so scared of getting beaten or having food taken away. Once she hypnotized a beautiful woman who had just been kidnapped. She was terrified of going to Master's bedchamber. Eremia hugged her really tightly. Norm was scared that her hair and dress would get dirty, but she told her not to worry about that. She asked her what sin she committed to deserve being bought so young and living under pain, hunger, and fear. She said she would expose every sin of the Hoyaldy house, and she would make sure it didn't fall on her. Norm endured so much and held on until today. After getting her into the carriage, Eremia talked with another slave. Apparently, Norn was in charge of watching over them all. The slave said Norn had the strongest magic out of everyone here. He said he didn't hold it against her. When the Count ordered punishments, Norn always went easy, and she would secretly cast healing magic later. She was torn, but she tried to protect them in her own way. He knew that. This slave liberation wouldn't have been possible without Norn's brooded Chevalier. Norn said she did terrible things to him, but he didn't hold it against her. She asked if it was true that he was sending letters, and he said yes. She asked if he still loved her, even after she had obeyed the Count and taken part in so many evils. Chevalier told Norn that if she bore guilt, they would both accept judgment together and atone together. Norn hugged him and continued crying her eyes out. She thought he hated her, and the letters stopped because she had done many bad things. She thought she would never be forgiven and never be loved again. Chevalier reminded her that they had always been just the two of them siblings. Meanwhile, Michelle's father asked what Lady Eremia was. He dragged her out of the ballroom and told her that their family heirloom had been stolen. They struck while most of their household was busy at the ball, and now the lady wasn't anywhere to be found. They had been searching since earlier. He told her that the reason Lady suddenly favored her, who wasn't particularly striking, was to create an opening to steal their heirloom. Michelle was shocked. Haku informed Eremia that they were almost at the clearing where the magic circle was set to teleport the carriage. Eremia told the slaves to choose themselves. They could start a new life or take the money and return home. Slaves weren't sure if they would ever have to return to this forest again. At the destination, a foreign noble she was close to had arranged her identities and funds for them. Norn told Eremia that she was number 333. Many comrades' corpses lie buried in that forest, and she wanted to dig them up and give each one a proper grave. Eremia promised to make that wish come true. At the Chancellor's office, Fontaine was reading the ledger. The ledger was likely to detail physical traits of the demon races: hair color, eye color, skin tone, age, sex, weight, height, and birthplace. He then realized that it was the records of human trafficking. Meanwhile, the slaves were finding the corpses that Norn buried. The more they dug, the more they found. There were even tiny children's skeletons. Other humanoid races were bought and sold as slaves across nations, which was an unbearable humiliation for Cardias and all the beastkin. The Count's crimes provoked a fury in King Calvin and the people that shook the very land. Count Hoyaldy had denied any explanation and, along with his wife, was judged and accomplice was sentenced to death. Normally, a noble would be beheaded to shorten suffering. But after thumb-crushing, water torture, whipping 100 times, and being paraded through the town, their end was to be the slowest, most agonizing: burning at the stake. Those involved in the slave trade and management were ruthlessly given corresponding punishments. The Count's house was abolished and their assets confiscated. This sentence would later be called King Calidus's last judgment in carrying out his royal duty, and Michelle was with a bunch of women. The leader of them told her to move further in, and if she hid her face, no one would buy her. Michelle had to take out her hoodie. Immediately after, a man approached her and figured that she was from a good family. She told him not to touch her, but he didn't see anything wrong with that because she came here to be bought. He promised to be gentle to her since she was a lady. Lady Eremia came and told him that she had made a promise to her. Michelle was shocked, but she shushed her. The man wanted to take both of them, but she kicked him in the face and they started running away. After getting to a safe place, she asked Michelle why she was selling for herself. She said that she was trying to atone a little for her sins and she didn't know any other way to survive. She saw the bodies dug up from the forest, and many of them were women. Her father must have toyed with them. She started crying and said she hated her father, so she kept avoiding him and avoiding him. She didn't even realize he and her mother were involved in such cruel acts. Eremia told her that she didn't think she was innocent. It was true that many people were trampled while she sang and danced. She asked if she was thinking of entering a convent. Michelle responded that she skipped morning prayers all the time, and she had never done cooking or laundry, so she wasn't sure if she could really fulfill the duties of a nun. Eremia offered her hand and told her that she wouldn't know until she tried, but she enjoyed dancing with her. She could enjoy cooking and laundry just like she enjoyed dancing. In the next scene, Lady Freya was leaving. Her work in this country has finished for now. A man approached them and talked with Freya. He knew that she was the second princess of Telesia and a woman of exceptional talent. Freya asked who he was. After Freya's departure, the verdict for King Chaldeus' contempt of court trial was handed down. Chaldeus was ordered to return part of his personal fortune to the national treasury and placed under 3 months' house arrest, barring him from participating in state affairs. And then, Eremia was asked to assume the role of regent and govern their nation in the king's stead. She humbly accepted this duty she had been waiting for. Even if it was only for 3 months, her conquest was completed. Yet, this was the product of many coincidences. Without that bracelet incident started by the prison guard, this would never have been possible. During her term as regent, she was going to be more careful but bolder. She was going to seize this kingdom in her hands, and the first step toward that goal was to propose the cancellation of the Four Nations Sports Festival within the Kingdom of Chaldeus. Four Nations Sports Festival was an event held every 5 years by 4 nations: the demons' Elheim Empire, the Celestia's Marqua Hold State, the humans' Telesia Kingdom, and the best folks' Chaldeus Kingdom. A grand festival of athletic competition between the 4 nations is held once every 5 years. The event, where all races display their strength and skill, drew immense popularity and floods of tourists to the host nation. However, beastfolk were naturally more resilient, even without transforming. Chaldeus tends to dominate the top ranks. The other 3 nations have long expressed their dissatisfaction over this. Meanwhile, Chaldeus citizens suspected that the beast form suppressant injected into their athletes had a stronger effect than necessary. Moreover, the organizing committee was composed entirely of nobles who monopolized the profits, and after the bribery and match-fixing scandal involving the judges, a growing movement within Chaldeus began demanding the event's cancellation. The townfolk seemed satisfied with this cancellation. Some would miss all the money the tourists bring in, though, and pity the poor athletes who had trained for years. But Queen Eremia's brilliance lies in not stopping at just a cancellation. First, every athlete selected to compete would receive a silver shield. They say those would be forged from the palace's own silverware, and Her Majesty proposes replacing the sports festival with the Chaldeus Grand Arts Exhibition. Eremia stated that when she married into this kingdom, she was astonished. This land was rich with artistic heritage, masterful paintings, exquisite embroidery, and refined literature. She told them that they were not merely a people of brute strength, and they were going to show the world the culture and artistry of Chaldeus. They were going to introduce printing presses and double the speed of tourist entry through enhanced border staff. Artists, musicians, opera singers, and every bearer of culture shall receive state grants for their work. All expenses for the Kingdom Art Exposition would be covered by her own dowry jewels, and by auctioning off the palace's excess furnishings to foreign nations. The auction would showcase Chaldeus's taste and craftsmanship to the world, and raise the necessary funds. As for ticket refunds, the Queen would personally cover those as well. The festival's organizing committee had been riddled with scandal across all 4 nations, and opposition groups existed in each of them, but they weren't sure if it was truly right for Chaldeus to end that long starting history here. Eremia noticed that Duke Gentile seemed torn. She told him that they weren't destroying the history that had been passed down until now. They were simply damming the stagnant flow, returning to the festival's true purpose, keeping bonds and friendship among nations. They were creating the time needed for that renewal. King Chaldeus was furious that she was trying to destroy this country while he was away. He found it a disgrace to the beastfolk to cancel such a long-standing sports festival in their own land. Duke Gentile wasn't sure whose side he should take. The people overwhelmingly support Queen Eremia because of that bracelet incident. A single nameless prison guard changed everything. But without the queen bestowing that bracelet, the miracle would never have occurred. He was sure the queen hadn't foreseen King Chaldear ordering the execution when she gave the bracelet. Whether she did or didn't, the tide of the times had begun to surge around the queen. With Duke Gentile, long a staunch Chaldeus loyalist, casting a vote in favor, the cancellation of the Four Nations Joint Sports Festival in the Kingdom of Chaldeus was decided. In the next scene, Ymir was freaking out because they were taking her clock, her chair, and her vase. Fontaine explained that it was to raise funds for the exhibition. More than half the rooms in the harem see no use most days. Whether furnishings were there or not made no difference. Ymir opposed, saying they were hers. Fontaine calmly responded that they were not her belongings. The harem was, at its core, the residence where the king and his family rest. She was merely lodging there. As for all property in this place, she holds no rights whatsoever. Ymir immediately went to King Chaldeus and accused Fontaine of insulting her. He responded to King that he merely stated the facts. Before King could say something stupid again, he reminded him of the time when he asked whether he had ever offered blessings to him and Lady Ymir. He said that he didn't hold Lady Ymir in personal esteem. However, he had shown respect to her as the king's favored consort. He had done all he could regarding her gowns and jewels. He understood that the king's wish was to bestow fine gifts upon her beloved. But if it meant breaking the law, it was another matter entirely. He yelled at the king that since he was charged with contempt of court in the High Court, crime statistics in their nation had only risen. This was what the sinners claimed. Even King Chaldeus tried to behead a man in court. There was no point in obeying the law in this country anymore. He asked if he grasped how it felt for their officers to be mocked like this. Fontaine was thinking about the reasons why his mother was able to abandon his father and him without consequence. By law, one who unilaterally divorces a faultless spouse should be judged, but that didn't happen. Only mates were the exception in this country. They trample on law, on people, and on their efforts. Those who did not keep the law were no longer human. Such people cannot possibly understand fellowship. Fontaine felt betrayed by Chaldeus. King Chaldeus was shocked because it was Fontaine's first time bearing the nature of their beastfolk before him like this. Not since the day his mother found her mate. When they were kids, Prince Chaldeus kept landing a blow on one of the knights and was praised by Fontaine. Fontaine said he couldn't match him in anything. Chaldeus said his mind was far keener than his. But still, if one were to be the king of Chaldeus, this was how it was supposed to be. King Chaldeus stated that Chaldeus had beautiful paintings and fine literature, yet abroad, they were ignored simply because beastfolk created them. Some insist that beastfolk were not beasts, but in the end, what was demanded most was strength. He told Fontaine that they were beasts and this was a nation of beasts, so they cannot flee their nature. He said he would understand when he found his mate, but Fontaine did not want a mate. He swore to himself to be the complete opposite of him. Since the day his mother left, since the day she took her own life, Fontaine had been thinking about that. King Chaldeus said they may have been fated never to understand each other truly. After he left the king's room, Fontaine was thinking about what Eremia said. She said that his people were not defined by brute strength alone and they should show the world the culture and arts of Chaldeus. He wondered if she could purify this cursed blood of them. He wanted Eremia to save them. In the next scene, Lady Freya presented herself with a beautiful dress, shocking everyone. She was wearing an exquisitely detailed dress with delicate gold thread, one pierced, woven so lavishly into silk. They were shocked that this was made by beastfolk. Freya stated that this was crafted for her by her sister, queen and regent of the kingdom of Chaldeus, Eremia, in anticipation of the exposition. Soon, an auction of Chaldeus-made furnishings and garments would also be held. The kingdom of Telesia hereby declared that it would fully support Queen Eremia's Chaldeus Kingdom Arts exposition. At the holy state of Marqua, Eremia sent them dresses with the structure of their angelic wings, measuring them with the utmost care, and gave them such a splendid dress. She also sent dresses to the empire of Elheim. Since welcoming her, they could feel the kingdom of Chaldeus beginning to change. Wearing that dress, their queen could feel Eremia's warmth and the artisan's skill and sincerity. The dresses Eremia gifted to the princesses and queens of other nations were receiving praise. Even before the auction, orders were pouring into the gold thread workshop from abroad. For Elheim, rose gold, for Marca, a warm-toned gold, and for Telesia, the most radiant and lustrous thread was given. Each shade was chosen carefully by the queen to complement the complexion of every race. The townsfolk were talking about how the number of passports had skyrocketed, and every hotel was fully booked. They wanted to make sure their foreign guests got to taste their finest cuisine too. Meanwhile, Ymir was freaking out because she was afraid that Chaldeus was going to be taken over by Eremia. Duke Gentile said that might be true. He said he was going to put it simply, so even a dull, provincial fool who still calls the queen that woman could understand. He told her that she and King Chaldeus were both finished. Even when his suspension ends and he returns to the throne, the king had lost the faith of not only the people, but also the nobility and the high court. There was no future for him, and her days of being treasured as the king's mate were numbered. Ymir asked if he was abandoning her and the king. He said he would prefer this be the last time she ever called him father. He was born in some impoverished backwater village, and he wouldn't doubt she sold her body once or twice just to earn her daily bread. She may have fooled naive King Chaldeus, but not him. He told her not to touch him and said she had reeked of a lowly prostitute from the very start. After that brutal talk, Ymir had to participate in her tea party with the other noble ladies, but all they were talking about was exposition, the queen, and the dresses. While they were talking, Ymir told them that they were not going. The ladies looked at her, confused. She repeated that she was not going to a grand exposition hosted by that woman. October arrived, and everyone was at the auction for Chaldeus-made dresses, furnishings, and paintings, held in anticipation of the arts exposition. The audience was shocked because they had never thought they would see the two royal sisters together again. Lady Eremia and Freya were standing right next to each other, waving at people. The day before the auction, Freya arrived, and Eremia was filled with strength and reassurance. But she was confused as to why she had decided to stay in Chaldeus. Freya asked if she had ever been in love. Eremia was shocked that her sister, devoted entirely to study, said something like that. Freya agreed that she found it strange herself, and she didn't even know if what she felt was love. She said that meeting someone could change a person. Back to the present, a person with a collar was watching the hall. He found it disgusting that all those idiotic nobles were crawling over each other like flies. He wanted everyone to die, so he used sharp knives to attack them. But someone used magic wind and dodged them. A woman appeared screaming that she would not let him. He figured she was a demon. She said that they reveal nothing to those who would obstruct their lord, and they were never going to forgive him. He said he didn't care even if his plan didn't work. It had been ages since he got to go outside, so he decided to have some fun tearing things up. In the next scene, people were talking about Duke Gentile and his family. His wife and his son Lord Kissling were both there, but they didn't see Lady Ymir. After supporting the cancellation of the Chaldeus Sports Festival, they wondered if the Duke intended to abandon King Chaldeus. Duke Gentile was thinking that there was no need to coddle the country girl any longer. Through this auction and exposition, the Queen's reputation would be firmly secured. Then they were going to strike the final blow to Chaldeus, force his downfall, and elevate Queen Eremia to the throne, and they were going to pair her with Kissling as her consort. She may be clever, but in the end he saw her as a young woman, and he was almost sure that once she fell in love she would lose interest in politics. Now as ever, true power in this kingdom lies with the House Gentile. He kindly waved at Queen Eremia. The auction hall was filled with royals and nobles from the Elheim Empire, the holy state of Marqua, the kingdom of Telesia, and the kingdom of Chaldeus. Not even the slightest incident or mishap could be allowed. Thus the Elheim Empire's mage soldiers placed a barrier around the venue that reflected all magical and physical attacks. And yet someone sent that boy into this fortified place. After the Count of the Hoyaldi incident, every noble household was investigated for illegal slaves. But there was one person whose estate the king would never dare to search. That means this boy was the mate's slave. The king's concubine sending a violent pawn into the queen's own event was a disgrace that must never reach foreign dignitaries. Nor could it be revealed that a demonic slave still existed within Chaldeus. To prevent the Elheim mage soldiers from detecting the boy, Haku layered another spell atop Elheim's barrier, one that severs perception and blocks sight throughout the hall. To use magic stealthily without Elheim's notice takes an immense toll. The slave said he hated nobles, but he didn't like his master either. The girl could dodge his attacks, but she was in a tough situation. He then asked Haku if he wasn't going to play with him. Normally water magic without sub-zero freezing and a woman's flame magic without her limits, fire should win. But the boy's mana pool was unfathomable. The speed of those water spears was inhumane. The fact that he had mastered levitation made him even more troublesome. The boy said the girl's levitation was still unstable and her fire spell work lacked focus, which bored him. So he started to consider killing the nobles for fun. Haku said he knew who his master really was. He was only bound by the restraint and he couldn't defy his master. He said that they could set him free. The boy asked how. He asked if they even knew how complicated the release ritual of this thing was. Haku responded that they would have to kidnap his master, draw their blood, locate the prison he was kept in, and pour that blood and mana into the seal to break it. The boy was shocked that he knew that. The girl Norn asked if Haku really meant to save that boy. Haku asked her not to call him Lord and added that the Elheim mage soldiers were strong. Those water spears wouldn't breach the barrier or harm any dignitaries. But his very existence must not be revealed to the other nations. Norn understood what he meant and told the boy to leave. She promised that she would free him from his current master. She said that their master was an incredible person, wise and brave, and they could make this happen. The boy asked for proof. She said that if he heard their master's name he would understand, but they couldn't tell him that here. Norn decided to make a promise instead, and said she would become his lover once they freed him. Both Haku and the kid were shocked. She asked if she was not good enough for him. He stuttered, asking what the hell she was saying. She said that they would be lovers, and they would hold hands. She even said she would kiss him. Suddenly, his master started torturing him, asking what he was doing. The venue was still completely intact. His master kept torturing him for defying her orders. Norn noticed that it was that damn collar and tried to take it off. The boy felt sorry that her wish wasn't happening. The entire venue was covered by Elheim's powerful barrier. He couldn't even scratch it on his own. This master dropped it and said that when he returned he would be punished. When his pain was over, Norn asked if it was his master who did that to him. The boy said he had no reason to trust her words, but it had been a long time since anyone was worried about him, and this made him happy. He suddenly opened his wings and started flying. Haku didn't expect him to be a hybrid of demon and angel. Norn asked if they should pursue him, but he said that with only demon levitation it was impossible to catch an angel's flight. They had driven him off for now, and that would be enough. Haku then told Norn that saying she would become someone's lover was not something to be spoken lightly. She said he was right, but she just thought no one would ever fall for someone like her trying to flirt. He said that this was not what he meant. He was talking about how Lady Eremia would be heartbroken. Confused, Norn asked the reason. He said that she had already suffered enough cruelty, and this world holds pain even greater than that. There was no guarantee a young man wouldn't act improperly toward a woman. What she did was no different from throwing herself naked before a carnivore and offering it a meal. Her life and body were saved by someone noble, and she must treat them with the same care. Haku then informed Lady Eremia that they had eliminated the attackers outside the venue. Eremia thanked him and asked if either of them was hurt. They comforted her that they were okay. The auction and the month-long art exhibition hosted by Eremia ended with great success. The national treasury prospered, and the citizens began to live more comfortably. But at the same time, people began whispering that they should depose Calvin and crown Eremia as their queen. Those thoughts spread not only among the citizens but also among the nobles as well. At Duke Gentile's mansion, Duke welcomed everyone and thanked them for gathering here. Today's gathering was to honor their queen, Eremia Klusner, and to celebrate the start of summer together. With that, they announced that Eremia, the queen, was entering. This time, Eremia was wearing a new dress, and she looked so pretty. It made sense that it was a new dress because the exhibition filled the treasury quite nicely. Some said she wanted to follow the queen's example and quit her lavish hobbies, and they were grateful to the queen for that. Duke Gentile introduced his heir Kisling to Eremia and asked her to remember him. Kisling said it was an honor to meet her. Eremia said the pleasure was hers, and she mentioned that he was quite skilled at horseback riding. Duke Gentile said his son loved to ride far and wide, though he may be a bit too gentle. He wouldn't even hunt, he just admired the rabbits and deer as they were. He thought that a virtuous queen would appreciate a soft-hearted boy. The other nobles noticed that the duke was desperate to boast about his son to the queen, and it was almost as if he was trying to pair them up, but they did look good together. What no one expected was that Lady Ymir would appear in the middle of nowhere and greet them. She apologized for her late greeting and said she would like to apologize here for the trouble she caused during the trial. Nobles were shocked that she attended a celebration honoring the queen's achievements and also apologizing to them. Eremia told Ymir that the trial was merely an unfortunate misunderstanding and that she must not trouble herself over it. Ymir acted like she was truly moved by her generosity. Duke Gentile was nervous because he had no idea what Ymir was up to. Ymir then told Kisling that the queen was so beautiful, wise, and wonderful, and he agreed. She said that that's why she was sure that she wouldn't mind that his mother was a commoner. Saying that in front of everyone was clever for Ymir. But Eremia stated that she wasn't sure what she was getting at, but she believed the barrier between nobles and commoners would eventually fade away. No one expected her to say something like that. Even Lord Kisling was shocked and asked if she meant she wouldn't mind being treated the same as a commoner. She confirmed him. In Telesia, large families were common, even among royalty. She had many cousins once, and most have passed away, but among the three sisters, Saria, Freya, and Eremia, their right to the throne was never very high to begin with. Since they were largely ignored in the palace, they could sneak down and play with commoner children. They made many friends in nearby villages. Then one day, a poor child barely able to eat each day found a nobleman's servant's dropped purse. The child hesitated for a moment, then ran to return it. But the nobleman cut the child down from behind without a second thought. The man was never charged with any crime. Another time, a child from the village heard that other heirs' families constantly tried to poison the royal children. He cried and said it was tragic that their own kin must kill one another. She asked if they really thought such human animation drew a line between royalty, nobles, and commoners. A man who slays a starving child for stealing to survive and not being punished for that was not a civilized world. In the kingdom of Telesia, reforms to close the gap between classes had already begun, led by her sister Queen Saria. The road would be long, but a time would come when commoners lived, learned, and built wealth as they did. The weight of a life, the desire to live were all equal among people. Lord Kisling was amazed by her words. Duke Gentile said if commoners gain knowledge and wealth, they may grow arrogant and start meddling in politics. She responded that commoners should participate in government as well. A nation cannot truly be civilized unless the majority of people take part in governance. They offered her some fine wine because all this speaking must have made her thirsty, but she refused. Duke Gentile was dying to change the topic, so he forced Lord Kissling to invite her to dance. After that celebration, Duke Gentile was in his harem trying to process what she said. He thought she was a stupid country bumpkin and a filthy wench. Meanwhile, Ymir was in her room, and she was still shocked by who her enemy was. Back in the queen's room, Eureka apologized for her long absence and neglecting her duties. Eremia said it was fine and asked if she hadn't been overworking herself. She said she was much better now. Eremia figured that she had something to say. Eureka said she heard she met her son, Kissling. Eremia said he was a kind young man. She responded that he cherishes his real mother, yet still calls and respects her as his mother too. She wanted to share her story with Eremia. Eremia was willing to listen to her story if it was something she wanted to share. She said that Kissling's mother was a farmer's daughter who delivered vegetables to their estate, and she was beautiful. One day her husband took her as a mistress and got her pregnant. Shamefully, she was unable to bear children. She had none. When that boy was born, she was given a house and wealth, and Kissling was acknowledged as the heir. They grew wealthy, but the servants' jealousy was merciless. She was treated cruelly, even by the staff. Society ignored her, and the Duke had long since lost interest. She couldn't believe Kissling's mother was ever happy being taken by her husband. Kissling told her that she would always be his mother. He respected her, and when she visited, his mother greeted her with shy but heartfelt hospitality. When she watched them together, she couldn't help but wonder what truly separated a noble from a commoner. She then wondered if Eremia really believed that royalty, nobles, and commoners were all the same kind of people. Eremia immediately responded positively. Eureka said there was one matter she would like to bring to her attention. In the next scene, Eremia called Haku and Chevalier. She said that from now on she was going to take a walk through the garden at the same time and on the same route. She asked if they understood her, and they nodded. 1 week later, Chevalier asked if she was hurt after summoning her. She said she was fine, and they started walking. Someone welcomed Eremia and stated that they were honored to receive her visit. That person was Lady Ymir. Lady Ymir grew up hating almost everyone she met. She hated older men, younger men, commoners, poor and grubby people. She also hated nobles. They fawn on those above and treat those below as less than human. Everyone envied, resented, deceived, or looked down on others. And she didn't believe that there was a person in the world who treated everyone equally, never bent their principles no matter what, until she met Eremia. In their meeting, Ymir summoned Dino, her slave. She told Eremia that she was born with everything: jewels, dresses, a warm bed, a clever sister, and on top of that she even made friends with commoner kids, and now she was saying that all people were equal. She asked how long she was going to keep acting like a saint. She said that if she couldn't uphold proper manners it would tarnish His Majesty's honor. Eremia responded that that day she brought up status first, so she answered kindly. Treating everyone equally was her goal. But until that becomes reality, if she made enemies of every class in society it would only spark needless conflict. Ymir took out a bottle and said everything about her was so pure and right, and this is why she hated her. She made Dino attack Eremia with his water magic, but Chevalier stopped his attack. Dino told Ymir that the knight's sword seemed to be magically reinforced. Ymir told him to hit it with enough force to overpower it. He followed her orders and kept attacking him. Ymir asked if she ever sold her body to feed her family, and she knew she hadn't. She didn't know how lecherous and selfish men could be. After they buy her, they say things like "your parents must be crying" or "you're a trashy man-chaser." Haku noticed that Norn's flame magic couldn't beat Dino. That's why Haku reinforced Chevalier's body and blade with his sorcery. Back when Eureka was talking with Eremia, she told her that Ymir was still keeping a demon-born boy as a slave, and she asked her to save him. He should be hidden somewhere in the retreat Ymir built. Eremia had located the prison, and they could release his restraints and free Dino another day. They need to get out before Eremia is in danger though. Suddenly they heard something, and Carla appeared. Dino was shocked to see his sister. Carla told Eremia that she was his sister and that she could neutralize his barrier. Eremia let her do that. Meanwhile, she told Haku to find a gap in the ward and take Ymir's blood. While Carla was neutralizing the barrier, Ymir panicked. Haku used that opening and appeared right behind her. Before she could do anything, he grabbed her arm and took some of her blood. After that, Haku didn't waste any time and broke the collar on Dino's neck. Ymir was too focused on her slight injury. Haku told Eremia that the boy's curse was lifted and it was time to escape, but she told him to heal Ymir. If she were left with scars, rumors could turn against them, so they must treat her. Haku healed Ymir's wound immediately. Ymir yelled at Eremia, asking how long she was going to keep up this hypocrisy. She told her to kill her right now if she hated her. Eremia responded calmly, saying that she had been irritated at times, but she had never hated her. Ymir couldn't believe how pure Eremia was. Eremia told her that she was born without blessings, and even after being taken into the palace, she never found a good partner, a good teacher, or a good friend. From her heart, she only pitied her. Ymir was devastated and she started coming to Eremia, but Chevalier knocked her out. Haku opened the portal and told Eremia that they were escaping with teleport magic. Once again, Eremia realized how pitiful Ymir was. In the next scene, there was a meeting about destinated mate. Destinated mate wasn't worshipped as strongly as the beastkin. Humans, demons, and celestials all share a similar idea. The so-called red string or love at first sight was what they believed. Some say that children born to couples who fall in love at first sight tend to have superior genetics. Repeated inbreeding causes genetic abnormalities, and children may be born with congenital defects. To avoid this, animals instinctively choose a mate whose genes differ most from their own. One theory claimed that instinct manifests as love at first sight. The beast can possess far more animalistic traits. That might be why they hold the mate bond in such strong reverence. It was truly fascinating. They would love to research more, but they didn't have the luxury of waiting for results. Neither does this kingdom. Their goal was to free this nation from the curse of destined mates. Back at the palace, Carla was yelling at Eremia for not killing Ymir. She didn't think a woman like that was worth leaving alive. Eremia calmly responded that this was not for her to decide. As the king's mate, she wielded influence over money and manpower. Many people hated her, and just as many loved her. If she were to be judged, it must be done openly. Carla had every right to hate that woman for capturing her brother and torturing him for so long. She took advantage of a celestial's healing magic, whipped him, healed him, and whipped him again over and over. Eremia promised that she was going to face judgment for that as well. In time, her anger was justified, but she must restrain herself for now. Carla still felt uneasy, so she told her that she concealed her identity with magic, became a lady-in-waiting, and used her position to scheme for her brother's rescue. So she was going to overlook the fact that she used her, and thanks to her actions, her brother was saved. She had to obey her instructions because she was indebted to her. Carla said she knew she owed her more than she could ever repay, so she was going to follow her. Eremia stated that the time will come no matter who struggles against it. Meanwhile, soldiers were practicing in the area, and even Dino was there. They knew him as the Queen's Guard. They heard they were elite warriors. They were recruiting misfits from the Night Order and even commoners, anyone skilled regardless of rank or age. Captain Chevalier trains them relentlessly. They wondered who was the strongest among them and Lord Kurt's Black Dragon Knights. But Lord Kurt scolded them and told them to leave if they didn't value their life. He was nervous about the Queen's Guard. Chevalier was once skilled enough to be considered for the Black Dragon Knights, but because his father killed a high-ranking noble, he was ultimately removed from the list. He had a bad feeling about all this. It was as if he had been terribly mistaken, a creeping fear that the times were leaving him behind. Meanwhile, Duke Gentile was frowning in anger because of Queen Eremia's dangerous ideas. It was a ridiculous delusion of grandeur for him. If she weren't the queen, he would have thrown her in prison as a thought criminal. Since that day, most nobles have grown hostile towards her and stopped attending her salons. But some, like Kisling, supported her ideas. Even wealthy commoners have begun supporting the queen, and that was troublesome for him. Upstarts who made their wealth in trade, married nobles, and slithered into the palace with their money were just some filthy rats in the duke's eyes. He was panicking because he was afraid that the royal court he built with his own hands would crumble. He must show his strength now to prove that authority belongs only to those of true noble blood, that only their privileged class could lead this nation. In the next scene, King Caldeus and Ymir had a meeting. He said that he made her feel lonely, but it was all right now. Her confinement was over, and he wouldn't leave her alone again. He promised to give whatever she desired. Ymir asked carelessly what her desire was. He said jewels, dresses, and anything. The royal treasury was overflowing right now, so he could give her anything. But Ymir didn't want anything because it was the money Lady Eremia earned. He threw away her jewels and accessories while screaming that she didn't want to dress herself with the money she earned. King didn't expect her to react like that. Duke Gentile barged into the room and said that before Queen Eremia grows arrogant enough to think this country belongs to her, they must show the entire nation King Caldeus' strength. He told him to build the grandest, most extravagant palace in history and show them that the heart of this nation was the king and his mate. Little did they know that this marked the beginning of the downfall that would send Caldeus and Ymir to the execution platform. In the next scene, Eremia was reading a report about the construction of a new palace for Ymir. People get used to things, and they grew used to the many good policies Eremia enacted while she was regent. People said they were trying to win back favor, since Lady Eremia stole popularity by creating jobs and pleasing the people, and it wasn't a bad move. If King Caldeus and his mate truly changed their ways and started caring about the people, that would be the best outcome. After all, they are still uneasy about making a foreign woman their queen. Even the ones who were saying they wanted the new queen to rule had changed their minds. They said that if the king and his mate were total failures, they might be okay with Eremia. There was that ancient case where a queen ruled in place of the king. She was born foreign. And of course, being foreign, she couldn't gain public support and abdicated quickly. Still, in making the king and his mate wake up, they were thankful for Eremia. They still considered the king and his mate as their nation's treasure, even though they were the reason why the commoners were hungry and starving. Carla, Norn, and Dino were also talking about this sudden news. They were more frustrated at the people because they worshipped Lady Eremia just a short while ago and now they flip on her. They knew nothing of her effort and this was definitely unforgivable. Chevalier agreed with Norn. As a fellow Cardias Beskin, it was disgraceful. Dino asked if Beastkin were nothing but idiots and sadistic royal mistresses. Eremia warned them to refrain from saying such things publicly. I was true. If King Chaldeus and Ymir had truly changed and began project for the people, they would be what the nation desires most. However, most likely the one planning and executing the new palace project was Gentile. She knew that his purpose was to display the authority of royalty and nobility to the people. Naturally, he had no intention of giving anything back to the citizens. He assigned the work exclusively to trade guilds run by high nobles, ensuring that the benefits flowed to the old aristocratic families, and the result was obvious. People saw the recruitment for the palace construction. Even a street shoeshiner could earn a bit more respectably just from tips. Some of them said it was rare to get these many jobs available at once. They were okay with the bare minimum as long as they got a place to sleep, eat soup and bread. They were still willing to work there. However, the working conditions were disastrous. They forced them to work harder and harder until they reached their limits. Seeing them work so hard for literally nothing made Eremia's heart ache. But Haku told her to endure it. She said that she never imagined the conditions would be this terrible. But everyone knew that the time must be at hand. She could hear the very foundations of this nation crumbling, drawing ever closer, and then disaster struck. One of the workers couldn't even open his house's door and begged his wife for water and just a bit of bread. Her wife was so worried and asked why he was so thin. She went to bring him soup and bread right away. He apologized to his wife that he couldn't leave anything behind. With that, he closed his eyes and died from overworking. Her wife was devastated. She couldn't believe they didn't even give the workers bread or water, and no money to bring home. Everyone heard about this man's death, and they protested the kind and the mate. They wanted bread, water, and the money they didn't give to them. They demanded answers from the king's mate. Eremia was informed that it had begun. The march started by the wives waiting for husbands and sons working on the new palace, and they were subtly guided by the anti-royalist soldiers stationed in town. The enfranchised women were encouraged to join while anyone trying to stop the march was removed. And so the crowd twisted like a massive dragon, surging forward through the rain. They didn't care about rain or snow and stood there screaming to the king's mate. They asked her to come out and return their taxes. Ymir was trembling and sweating inside her warm palace. She said that her foster father was the one who decided to build the palace, and she was confused as to why everyone was angry at her. Gentile never let any evidence of his own extravagance leak out. Chaldeus was obsessed with pleasing Ymir, and never bought luxury items for himself. Thus, all the women's anger fell entirely on Ymir, and there was the bracelet incident. Many citizens believed the rumor that Ymir had staged the incident to frame the queen. They went further and used black dragon knights to drive the women outside of the castle. They couldn't believe they were waving swords at unarmed women. Lord went to the king and begged him to say something to them. They say they wouldn't leave until the mate declares the palace construction. But Ymir said she could hear those vulgar women snarling from here, and if she went out there she didn't know what they would do to her. Her foster father was the one who approved the construction, so they must let him explain. He said that they cannot bring the duke before a mob of this size, even if they were women. Ymir still resisted, and King agreed with Ymir. He told Kurt that he wouldn't allow him to endanger Ymir. But the women were still asking for Ymir. However, before the eyes of the people, the conditions had been met, and Ymir was being thrown outside to face her punishment. The women who had been asking for her grabbed her and took her. As they took her away, they started beating her. King lost control and started hitting women in there to save Ymir. But it was too late. They took Ymir away, separated her from the king so she would never again mislead the king. They took her to the strongest prison in the entire kingdom, Valstein prison. They told the guards in there that they had brought them the most sinful harlot in the world and asked them to lock her up so she would never cause trouble again. The guards were shocked and confused because they couldn't even recognize who that woman was. The guards took custody of Ymir to calm the furious wives. Later, a word came from the palace revealing her true identity. But Ymir developed a high fever from the riot's shock and the rain, making it difficult to move her. King Chaldeus, having cut down a civilian to save Ymir, was again placed under confinement by the high court. But he was still thinking about Ymir. Carla just wished that Ymir would die like this. Eremia asked Carla if she was the one who put Ymir in front of those women. Carla boldly responded that it was her rightful punishment. 3 days after Ymir was imprisoned, a bell rang to urge people to pray for her recovery. Those who pray, those who curse, those who lament, and those who laugh are mixed in the town. Dino said he wouldn't pray for her, but Eremia was praying. She was praying that she must not die now. She had not yet proven the meaning of her own birth. Meanwhile, Ymir was thinking about why she was even born while in pain. Toyed with by men even after Chaldeus found her, the nobles laughed at her, indulging in the pleasure while producing nothing. The only thing she knew was that she hated Eremia. Ymir's high fever dragged on. Doctors and many palace maids gathered from the royal palace and they continued the treatment desperately. Meanwhile, in the queen's palace. Originally, this was Ymir's detached palace, but because the queen stayed here for so long, it eventually came to be called the Queen's Palace. Norn said she simply cannot tolerate Dino's behavior. He is called Lady Eremia without honorifics, and he sits on the back of the sofa and yawns in front of her. It was far too disrespectful. Chevalier had noticed that too. Haku didn't really approve of it either, but Eremia said to let him act how he wanted. He asked if it caused any trouble in the barracks, but Dino barely spoke to the other soldiers. Even during training he only says yes or no. The Queen's Guard is full of odd types, so a bit of rudeness gets overlooked. Eremia told Norn, Chevalier and Haku that she felt terrible for the stress she had caused them with her selfishness. Norn said she never meant to blame her. She knew that, but Dino and Carla had backgrounds even more complicated than Norn. She believed they each had their own reasons. Marriages between celestials and demons were not welcomed. Their blood mixes poorly, and children are rarely born. And even if a child is born and survives, that rare being becomes a target for mages and scientists as an experiment. Carla and Dino had their parents killed and barely escaped alive. Mages, scientists, con artists and thieves wanted them. They had no place in the demon kingdom, Elheim, or the celestial nation, Marqua. Then they were sold to a rich man. Naturally, Dino broke his shackles and killed him. They were caught again and again, kidnapped, sold off. But not once did they bow their heads or call any rich man or noble lord. That was their last shred of pride. Then they were offered to Ymir, with the power of that cursed stone. Even under hypnosis he remembered biting his lip in humiliation. After being rescued from Ymir, Dino was bedridden for a while. Besides his sister Norn, he realized Eremia also came to take care of him. Eremia was a strange woman in his eyes. When he wanted to thank her for helping him recover, Dino gave a half-hearted thanks and shocked Chevalier. Eremia stopped him and said it was fine and that she was glad he got better. What Dino believed was that rich people, nobles and royalty were all thinking they were special, and if he didn't treat them specially, they would yell or hit him. One day Eremia noticed that a pair of birds outside in the tree looked just like him and Carla, two lives supporting each other. He found her very strange. She was royalty, but she never acted arrogant. She was warm, just like his sister Carla. After that he decided to get into the Queen's Guard group. Eremia said they cannot announce it publicly, but having a magic user join them was reassuring. But she told him not to push himself. He carried deep wounds in both heart and body. Chevalier wasn't sure if they should let someone who couldn't even call her lady join the guard. Eremia saw no problem and said she was counting on him. When Dino asked Carla if she didn't hate calling Eremia lady, she said that she could do anything if it was to protect him. But now she felt like she truly respected her as a person. She had lived through plenty of hell, she had been targeted, hated and looked down on, yet she never loses her dignity or kindness. Though she didn't think she was far too lenient with Ymir, she intends to repay the debt for saving him. When Dino saw Eremia praying for Ymir, he called her a hypocrite. Eremia said she didn't dislike that about him, but she may be wishing far crueler things for her than he thought. Even if she recovered, the people's distrust and anger toward her wouldn't disappear. She would definitely be judged. In the worst case, she would lose her life. Even so, Eremia wanted her to survive. Dino thought she wanted her to suffer more than she already was and asked if she hated her. Eremia responded that at that time when she said she never hated her, it wasn't hatred, but Ymir still had something she must accomplish in this world. That's what she believed. While they were talking, King Chaldeus opened the door and thought Ymir was there. He approached Eremia and told her to come back to the harem with him, thinking she was Ymir. He seemed like he had lost his mind, so Dino was prepared to protect Eremia. King Chaldeus said he would never let her go again. He grabbed Eremia's arms and told her to return to the harem. Eremia was confused and told Chaldeus that she was currently fighting an illness in Valstein, but Chaldeus kept squeezing her arms and he was hurting her. Dino was about to attack him, but Eremia stopped Dino because he couldn't attack the king. He was still the king, whether he liked it or not. If he struck him, he would be executed. Eremia told Chaldeus to let her go and that she was not Yor, but he wasn't even hearing her. He kept saying that she was Ymir, his mate, and a mate must always stay by his side. Eremia confirmed that he was not sane the moment she looked at his eyes. Haku appeared and threw King Chaldeus away from them to use his teleportation magic. Dino asked if the king had gone mad. Haku said he didn't know, but they needed to be extra cautious to keep Eremia safe. When King Chaldeus opened his eyes, the first thing he asked was where his mate was. He said that he needed his mate, he must have one. If he didn't have his mate, he believed he would fall apart. The maid told him that his mate was currently fighting an illness in Valstein prison. He finally remembered her and said the High Court forbade him from visiting her. The maid told him that the only one who could support him now was the queen. He seemed like he had forgotten Eremia, so she decided to remind him of her name. She said that she was Eremia Klesner, his lawful consort. Meanwhile, Eremia was in her room, but her hands were trembling so much. Norn was panicking even though she said she was fine. She told Eremia not to push herself. Chevalier was confused as to what in the world the king was trying to do, calling Lady Eremia his mate. Haku said he wasn't in his right mind. They didn't know what he would do to Eremia. They were seconds away from using magic. If Haku hadn't blinded him and teleported them, things might have gone really bad. Fontaine came and apologized for his sudden visit. He said that there was urgent business. After hearing from the sisters, they had the king examined by a physician. His 3-month confinement, the recent riot, the imprisonment, and the prolonged separation from his mate caused him to have severe delirium. To escape mental anguish, the king had convinced himself that she, the queen, was his mate and ordered that she be brought to the harem. Eremia was shocked and yelled at Fontaine not to be ridiculous. They locked her in the detached palace immediately after she entered the country. He didn't even present her to the citizens or the nobles. He humiliated her endlessly because she wasn't his mate, and now that his mate was home, he was telling her to support him because she was queen. Fontaine had no words to refute her. They also believed they could not allow the king's rampage to stand as it was. But there was another problem. Duke Gentile took Ymir, once a commoner, as his adopted daughter to make her a noble lady. He gave her the rank necessary to marry the king and suppressed the nobles who opposed accepting his mate. That's why he could wield so much power in the palace. If the king accepted her as his consort, then the duke's position would be gone. Duke was begging the king to remember Ymir as his mate, but Chaldeus kept saying that his partner was the queen of this kingdom. He said that Eremia liked jewels and dresses, and she had a bright smile, and she also served the people. He was actually describing Ymir. Duke Gentile told him that none of that was true. The one who had supported the king as his destined mate was Ymir. He yelled at the king, asking if he was abandoning his own mate. King Gentile started to transform into a beast because he was furious that he claimed he would abandon his mate. He slashed Duke's face with his claws and hurt him. The incident where Chaldeus gravely injured Gentile made the front page of the next day's newspaper. It wasn't true, but people claimed the king crushed Gentile by force because the duke was anti-monarchy. In reality, Gentile supported the monarchy and was a man who squeezed labor and taxes from the people. But because his son Kisling visited Eremia's salon and because he briefly leaned towards the queen's faction, the false story spread that the king punished him for siding with the people. And soon after, Duke Bradley Gentile passed away. The people were angry at King Chaldeus for killing Duke Gentile and considered him an enemy of the people. Meanwhile, Duke Orleans was waiting for his time to come. Kevin, the short-haired one, called him Duke and made him mad. He told Kevin not to call him a duke. He said that he was just a man who managed not to die. After the Duke Gentile's death, people wondered if Kisling was going to inherit the Gentile house. But since he supported the queen's faction, the other nobles were worried that the largest noble faction in Cardia might be overtaken by the queen's faction. Some asked if they should hurry and seek the lady queen's favor, but the queen had already proclaimed equality for the people. She might strip the nobility of their privileges like Queen Surya of Telazia did. But they couldn't afford to belong to the strongest faction of this kingdom, so they didn't know what to do. They wanted to stay aligned with the ruling side, but they didn't want their privileges taken away. While the nobles panicked, King Chaldeus was asking for Eremia. Fontaine told him that they had conveyed his wishes and, more importantly, the High Court had complaints again about his executing Duke Bradley without trial. He said that he insulted his king, and he merely carried out the punishment for insulting the royal family. The issue was that he did it without going to the High Court, but he couldn't see that. King then asked why Eremia hadn't come to the harem. He said she stayed by his side every moment until recently and concluded that there must be someone getting in the way. Fontaine panicked and went to inform Eremia. He said that if she didn't move into the harem, Chevalier and Dino would be executed for approaching the king's mate without permission, and Norn and Carla would be dismissed too. That was what King Calvin had declared. Eremia started to get mad. He was utterly unreasonable. She thought about taking the throne already, but it was still too early for that. Most nobles were in chaos, unsure whether to switch to the queen's faction. If she faced Calvin head-on in this state, bloodshed would be unavoidable. Eremia had made her decision and went to the harem. King was so happy that she finally came and said these were the maids who would serve her. Eremia kindly smiled at them and said she was looking forward to working with them. All of those maids originally served Ymir, so this was actually the enemy territory. She couldn't let her guard down for even a second, but if she could take control of this place, they could make a revolution with far fewer casualties. Norn and Carla were kept on as the queen's personal maids. Chevalier and Dino were removed from their posts as the queen's attendants but placed in the queen's guard. And starting today, Lord Kurt would serve as the queen's protector. King wanted to go to the garden to see the roses with Eremia. While they were walking around in the garden, he asked why she wasn't wearing a new dress. He said that she used to delight him every day with colorful outfits. Eremia told him that Chaldeus's finances were not stable and luxury was the enemy. Eremia always kept frugality in mind. While he was speaking total nonsense to her, Eremia noticed his innocent smile. He had been living inside a dream all his life, and it wasn't a dream that was only sweet and gentle. Ever since the day his mother, father, countless lovers, and their children all died, he had been trapped in a long, long nightmare. As they spent their day together, it was time for Eremia to give herself to him. Carla and Norn begged Eremia to refuse him because Ymir could return at any moment. This was the fate every princess and noblewoman had endured throughout history, and she cannot be the only one to escape it. At night, when she was waiting in bed, she realized how scary this was. It reminded her of the day she first entered this kingdom. Calvin came, and she noticed that he didn't remove his gloves. Calvin asked if she was teasing him by asking that. When he removed the gloves, she gasped because of his skin. He said that his skin never returned to normal after the day his mother died. The backs of his hands and his back were all covered with that scale. If she touches a dragonkin's scales with bare skin, she will get hurt. He apologized for the trouble and promised to be careful. Seeing Eremia's sad face, he thought she was so gentle. He approached her and tried to kiss her. Right before she pushed him, Haku came to her help and put him to sleep. He was surely dreaming of something pleasant. Eremia started crying her eyes out and hugged Haku for comfort. Haku said she was really troublesome. She only had to tell him she wished to escape. She said that Surya told her to marry King Calvin and take control of this country. And to her, Eremia was nothing but a sacrifice. Haku closed this space so the maids couldn't overhear them. To be safe, he sent King Calvin into another dimension as well. He then showed her a letter. It was from Queen Surya. She told her that if she was reading this letter, then it meant the time had come for her to know everything. Talicia was not in the midst of major reforms. She exposed and punished many noble families' crimes, stripped them of their privileges and returned rights to the people. So many nobles despised her for that. Freya cured the blight of crops and the diseases plaguing the people, increasing productivity so nobles live almost the same lives as before. But there would always be those who want to monopolize resources and look down on poor foolish commoners. And now people like that have set their sights on her, Eremia. Some want to raise her as the figurehead of an anti-monarchy faction, while others plan to take her hostage to threaten her. Sadly, Telesia was now a more dangerous place for her than Cardias. It was true that they needed an alliance to stand against the Elheim Empire, which keeps annexing nations one after another. She ordered her on that day to seize the throne and to take her life if she failed. The queen forced an impossible task on her sister and abandoned her to make nobles believe that Eremia was worthless to the queen, so they would think she had been left to the hidden illness they had planted that day. Above all, she misunderstands her own worth. She possessed a wonderful value that neither she nor Freya had. If she were reading this letter, she was sure Eremia had already overcome many hardships, and surely she now had irreplaceable friends who needed her. She and her sister Surya loved her as well. Whether she changed Cardias with her friends, protected the kingdom, or went out into a wider world, it was her choice. She apologized to Eremia that she couldn't send her home, but she promised to give her all her support. She asked Eremia to live freely. Eremia finally understood why her sister was acting that way towards her, and she was sobbing. She loved her sisters too. In the next scene we see a story from a little while before now. At the Queen's Palace, Dino and Norn were training to measure their basic magic levels. Haku had put a barrier around them so no one would notice if they went all out. Haku then slashed his arm and created a big wound on his body for Dino to heal. Dino used his celestial healing magic and he was powerful. The next one was Norn, but she couldn't heal his arm as flawlessly as Dino, so Haku said he would heal the rest himself. She apologized, but there was no need to apologize. This was only to see what she could do right now. There were a few things she must watch out for when using healing magic. If the wound is extensive, they must remove their clothes so cloth or metal fragments don't get sealed into the body. And always remember that neither demon nor celestial healing could cure fatigue. The next test was flying, and they were both good at it. As for the next test, he asked Dino to use ice magic and Norn to use fire at full power. Norn was so upset that she couldn't compete at anything. Healing, flight, offense. Dino was better than her in every area. Dino wanted Haku to teach him the barrier magic he used. It was powerful, and he could use it in all kinds of situations. Haku told him that barriers come in handy a lot, but strong beastkin, especially dragonkin, could sometimes see through them. Closer to them, there were King Chaldeus, Fontaine, and Lord Kurt. In front of those three they must not use any half-baked magic. Haku then asked Norn if she had any other spellings she could use. She said she had simple hypnosis and document forgery. He asked her to change the proper nouns he marked in a document into the names of other countries, and as he thought, powerful beastkin would likely see through this. Not just dragonkin, those with the moon eye too. He told her to study ink and paper, and with practice she could raise the quality. Amon Wolf Beskin, who draws power from moonlight. There were those with golden eyes. They were called moon eyes, and those with these rare eyes could draw power even from daytime moonlight. Chevalier was a wolf Beskin, and one who possessed the moon eye. To avoid wielding that overwhelming power carelessly, he always kept one eye covered. He was her first love. When she was little, she made a bouquet in the forest, and with magic, she secretly wrote her feelings into the ribbon. She adored Chevalier. He thanked her for the bouquet and said she was a smart and gentle lady. He said that she would meet someone wonderful who truly suited her and would fall in love when she grew up. He saw right through her feelings with that moon eye, and that was her first heartbreak. After practice, Norn returned to Eremia. Eremia wanted to share some sweets with her, but she didn't seem okay. She said that she couldn't accept that, and she didn't have the right to. She was upset that she didn't have any outstanding abilities at all. Eremia told her that if she took it, she would be happy. Eremia didn't know what happened, but she said that the injured, the sick, those with wounded hearts had things they couldn't do for all sorts of reasons, and they too deserved to receive things. Norn thanked Eremia for her comfort. She realized that Eremia was aiming for a world where the injured and the sick could live happily. Back to the present, King Chaldeus woke up with Eremia next to him. He said that he was glad he could greet another morning with her. He had been feeling quite good lately, as if he had finally awakened from a long nightmare. They got ready for the day and started walking inside the palace together. The people who saw them together were shocked. They wondered if the king would accept Queen Eremia like this. It was time for the nobles to decide their own stance now. At this rate, the divide between the royalist faction and the queen's faction may disappear entirely. The problem was the queen's equality for all people. If the king gets influenced by that, their position would be in danger. But Chancellor Fontaine was at the king's side. He was moderate but still noble to the core. There was no way he would entertain such a mad idea as treating commoners equal to nobles. They decided to just watch for now and wait for the king and the chancellor to correct the queen's misguided beliefs. Fontaine said that King Chaldeus's mind was very calm right now, and staying with the queen would surely bring peace for him and for this country. He told everyone to destroy every portrait of the former mate. Under Fontaine's orders, all traces of the former pair Ymir were removed from the palace. From obvious things like portraits to personal belongings, servants were forbidden to speak of the former pair, and this gradually spread to the nobles as well. And then the news reached the commoners. They decided to burn their portraits of the former pair too, and by the time Ymir finally recovered, Fontaine visited her. He said that King Chaldeus currently believes that Queen Eremia was his true mate, and the two were spending their days together quite affectionately in the palace. Ymir was shocked. Fontaine continued to inform her that her adoptive father, Duke Gentile, had passed away, and Lord Kissling was expected to inherit the House of Gentile. However, he had no intention of maintaining the adoptive tie with her. Furthermore, regarding her family, when public criticism grew due to her extravagance and the heavy taxes, they quickly fled the country, used the wealth gained when she entered the harem to buy noble titles abroad, and even changed their names. They cut ties with anyone related to Chaldeus, and almost no one knew what became of them. In short, she was completely alone in the world. Ymir was devastated. She was so shocked that she started laughing. Fontaine told Ymir that, as thanks to her past service to the king, she would be given a manor, some funds, and a few servants. If possible, he asked her to leave the country and live quietly. She continued laughing and said that she thought that with all the bad rumors about her wasting money, her father, mother, and her brother must have had a hard time in the village, but they just ran away without hesitation. Fontaine told her that they were going to assign surveillance to ensure she didn't spread anything she saw or heard in the palace. With that, he left her there. In the high court, the nobles gathered regarding the private execution of Duke Gentile, carried out due to King Chaldeus's violence against unarmed citizens. Everyone agreed that as the head of state he should receive proper judgment for both crimes, but the two cases were closely tied to a single course, and the palace strongly requested that the King Chaldeus not have his memories of Ymir triggered again. Even the violent act in the bracelet incident originated from the former mate. Given this for future rehabilitation, overlooking the crime may be unavoidable. They still haven't held the parade to present his marriage to Eremia to the people. King wondered what he had been doing to ignore this. Eremia said he had been busy every single day. He thought Eremia had been waiting for him, so he decided to commission the most magnificent carriage and dress in history. But Eremia said no. She said this was not what she desired and they could use the previous king's carriage and her wedding dress would be more than enough. She asked him to think first of stabilizing the nation's finances. King calmly listened to her. Nobles started to notice that when it came to Lady Eremia, even the king was powerless. The palace felt so much calmer now. But some women were complaining that she was still wearing those plain unfashionable dresses because she should lead the fashion trends. Eremia noticed that the king had changed. If this continues, he may not become a great king, but he might at least complete his reign in peace. If she were to continue living as this nation's queen, then she too must be prepared. Haku told Chevalier to wear a bracelet. With it, even without magic training, they could communicate. Chaldeus wore the bracelet, and they started talking about Eremia and Chaldeus. Haku said they had no physical ties with King Chaldeus right now, because in bed he put the king under hypnosis and showed him false memories. He did so because Eremia wished it. But now, this country is probably heading in a good direction. Lady Eremia was a deeply compassionate person. She could never abandon this nation's people. Surely she would soon make up her mind to bear the king's child and become the mother of this nation. Chevalier asked what Haku was wishing for. He said this was just his opinion, but he wanted her to leave this country and be free. He didn't want the princess he had protected since childhood to be taken from him. It was nothing but his own selfish sentiment. Now Lady Eremia has truly become a queen loved by all the people of this nation. But the king and the citizens have all wronged Her Majesty before. The people of this nation had long suffered with no time to gain knowledge. They were foolish and selfish, but poverty dulls the mind, so it was only natural. If the nation changes, the people will change too. There shouldn't be room for the sentimental wishes of just one man. In the next scene, Freya received a letter from Freya. The letter said there was someone she wanted her to meet. 10 years ago, on the day of the tragedy caused by the former queen of the kingdom Chaldeus, another story took place that same day. A boy named Orleans wanted her mother to give him white grape juice and not red grape juice. Her mother told him not to refuse a drink the queen herself poured for him. As long as Calvin, the legitimate queen's son, existed, his position as first in line to the throne was secure. Still, quarrels often broke out among the lower-ranked heirs and their mothers. Among them, Orleans, whose mother was a viscount's daughter, was the lowest in succession. Therefore, he was not seen as a particular threat. He paid little mind to teasing the other heirs and grew up relatively carefree. Those lowest in rank sat slightly apart from the other heirs and mothers. That day everyone cheered for the king and started drinking their wine, but Orleans wasn't drinking anything because he hated red grape juice. As everyone started vomiting blood and dying, her mother covered Orleans' mouth and told him not to make a sound even though she was coughing blood too. He watched what happened between the king and the queen. Orleans' mother carried him outside, but the poison in her was spreading. Kevin appeared and saw her. He asked why he was here and he said he was a dog beast man. His nose was sharp. He smelled something strange and came to the palace. Orleans told him that the queen poisoned the king and all the concubines and their children. She said that this child managed not to drink the poison, but she drank it. The woman told Kevin to take the estate's valuables and sell them, hide Orleans' identity and flee far away. She begged Kevin to do that for her right before she died. Kevin had no time to say goodbye to her and he carried Orleans. The maid saw them and gave them some jewels and valuable things. She wished she could accompany them, but if too many servants or too much property disappeared from the estate, suspicion would fall on them. She apologized, but that was all she could do. There was a servant's child who died of illness, so they dressed them in Lord Orleans' clothes, applied makeup and carried them to the room. It would be dangerous, but this was the time to repay their lady for her kindness. He was clever and strong, so the maid was counting on Kevin for this duty. Orleans' mother took Kevin from the orphanage and raised him. Warm meals, good pay and kind co-workers he had were all thanks to her. So he was dedicated to protecting Lord Orleans. They had enough for travel expenses and living costs for a while, and so Orleans and Kevin fled the country. Life in a foreign land was never easy, but thanks to his devotion, Orleans' heart remained calm. He asked Kevin how long he was going to continue pretending to be a woman. He said that a sick younger brother and the older sister caring for him was a story that draws sympathy and makes life easier. Orleans felt bad for burdening him with everyone. Kevin learned everything so fast he reads and writes like a full adult. A noble scholar was looking for an assistant, so they recommended him there. And at the place he was introduced to, there was a man who immediately figured out that he was a beast man. He said that he knew someone like him and he could tell. He asked if he would assist him with a small human experiment. He would pay 3 times the promised amount. Realizing he was a boy, he experimented with him even more. When Orleans noticed that Kevin looked pale when he came, he said it was nothing, but he refused. Orleans asked him to rely on him a little. Right now, he and Orleans were just 2 siblings. Aside from his enthusiasm for beastman research, the noble scholar was surprisingly decent. Later, Orleans also studied under him and began working for him. Nearly 10 years passed while they lived far from the kingdom of Cardias. Kevin's body was entirely that of a man now, yet he still dressed as a woman. He said that being thought of as a weirdo was convenient in some way. More importantly, there was something he was going to tell him. It was reported that when King Calvin ascended the throne, he found his destined mate. Orleans was shocked. Kevin asked how he was going to interpret this. They didn't even know what disaster a mate would bring to that country this time. Orleans responded that he had nothing to do with that country anymore. But Kevin told him that he was the true king of that nation. He had served him all these years, believing that even this information he obtained from the spies he secretly placed in Cardias. If another tragedy like that occurs again, her mother would never rest in peace. And with that, they found themselves talking with Eremia. Kevin told her that if his brother had governed the country well, he never would have planned to act. But the results speak for themselves. Orleans told Eremia that his goal was to destroy the fated mates doctrine, its symbols, King Calvin and Ymir.